to this. So in very short, giving a model for success, and hopefully, as we see it now, it is only laying the path for a great success also in Gippsland. Taiwan and UK case studies, I bring those for your insights and hopefully also for a few questions. And last but not least, what it will be in store for Gippsland to actually bring us forward and also realize what we are all very, very keen on kind of seeing happening. Here on the left side, as you can see, that's my baby from Taiwan, fully in operation as we speak. 111 turbines in the Taiwan Strait. So who are we? We are a Danish original company, having kind of developed and expanded offshore wind projects over the last many years. Currently, we are 1 in 4 of the offshore wind farms in operation is under our responsibility. So in many ways, I hope that we can make our small contribution, both in concern of operation, but basically for the entire value chain in concern of development and installation of these projects. In very short and as an overview, we obviously have some fairly significant clusters across the globe, particularly in the UK, of UK East and UK West. I'll use the case study of UK East today and showing some of the results that we have gotten over a long period of time, and hopefully also will kind of showcase what is in the store for Gippsland when we are kind of realizing the projects in the future. And my most recent example, obviously from Taiwan, where I'm currently located myself, is with 1.8 gigawatt and soon to be 100 and almost 80 turbines in the waters to be operated. And last but not least, of course, what we are looking into with the 2 licenses, which we are very grateful of having obtained for Gippsland. It's potentially up to 4.8 gigawatt of capacity, and in concern of number of turbines, we're looking beyond the 300. So what is it actually in kind of real numbers that we are looking at when we use the case study from the UK East and the Grimsby on the east coast of UK and England? In very short, of course, the cluster of wind farms is fairly significant. But one thing is the wind farms in itself. More interesting in this context is obviously to look at what is it that it has done for the whole society in the local communities, the people that have been seeing this transition ongoing for over a decade now. And where are we now in concern of creating of jobs, and particularly like creating a reality where the wind farms and the operation of these wind farms, even the new projects being installed, they kind of work in smooth and a good collaboration with basically the people that lives in that area. And for us, of course, and not just for us, but for many of the wind farm developers as well as operators, of course, this has been a key focus, but also kind of our responsibility to ensure that this transition from other industries into this offshore wind industry has worked in this way, and actually that we can bring the evidence and the data that you see on the screen today. Because otherwise, it's not really a sustainable industry that we are creating. This East Coast hub are still under development, so we will see more and more wind farms, and hopefully, if I come here next year or the year after, these numbers will only have gone one way, and that's obviously being increased quite significantly. So again, as I mentioned before, the most recent example on a personal note comes from Taiwan. And Taiwan is in that sense, from an East Asia perspective, the pioneer when it comes to kind of building out and establishing a framework that allows, or have been allowing us to kind of develop, install, and now also operate offshore wind. And as of today, we have close to 90% of local Taiwanese employed. I'm one of the few ones left with not a Taiwanese passport. But at least I think it's a great success, not just for us as a business, but for the industry, that we have seen a fairly rapid development of this offshore industry establishing itself. And again, the numbers tells its own story. We have from not just a project perspective, but also from a job and social value perspective, we do see the creation of some real kind of tangible results. I think one to mention here is also the engagement with the kind of institutions when it comes to universities and other educational organizations in and across Taiwan, where of course that is for us the kind of the key to success, where we bring in many different skill sets and many kind of young generations to take us to the next level. Because one thing is what we bring from Europe and UK of experience, but we do believe that going to the Asia Pacific region and also to Gippsland is obviously where we can take the industry to another level in concern of deploying new levels of resources, as well as also skills being applied into this industry. So again, with these two case studies, of course, creates a solid base. And at the same time, it of course takes our inspiration to actually bringing the industry to Gippsland, and together with this audience and the surroundings, of course, in a respectful way, creating this offshore wind to take off in the near future. And last but not least, of course, as I always tend to say, it's all about the people. Obviously, we are not creating any success if we don't have the support, both from the people that really directly wants to join the industry development, but also indirectly support throughout many years to come. And again, with a few examples, both from Europe, UK, and latest Taiwan, I think our focus as a business is very much to create that kind of sustainability in the people aspect. And that goes through many generations. Obviously, in concern of offshore operation, we are looking at maybe 35 years of operation, and that at least can bring different generations to hopefully explore and be engaged in this business and industry. As well as, of course, trying to help, as I mentioned before, the educational institutions and organizations to understand what does it take of helping a new industry develop in a new country or in a new area. So with that, I'm quite keen to see if there's any questions from the audience, either just by raising your hand or through the app. And beside that, thank you very much for listening.
We've got some questions there through the app, so I'll ask that and then come later. Great, thanks very much, Andreas. We've got a few questions through the app before we move on to our panel session. So we might go through some of the questions, and I'll hand back to Andreas to answer them. From your experience elsewhere, what changes to the energy market structure that would better support wind investment payback?
I think particular many talk about like how we ensure that, like when we start an industry in a new area or in a new country, of course it is so important that we learn from each other and not trying to build something unique, both in concern of local content, but obviously there are circumstances for any new industry and new area coming in. But still, that's also why we bring these case studies to the audience today, because I do believe that with this small contribution and input, that's where we kind of like find the key to success. Not trying to kind of build something unique for Gippsland, or but actually take the best from those experiences and bring it here, and then like merge it up with what we see is required also in this context.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much. Another question that's just come through is, what are some specific O&M challenges that you faced only in Taiwan that could apply to Gippsland?
Yeah, obviously I need to get myself more and more kind of being more insightful in kind of the weather patterns. But generally, just to share a few examples that also have surprised me from being in Taiwan for the last 5 years and operating these wind farms. Environmental factors as lightning, as current. High wind is not an issue. That's why we build offshore wind. But clearly, of course, I think accessibility to these offshore wind farms, and that's where logistics becomes a key to success, but also a risk if we don't do it right. Then, of course, we will not see the efficiency measures in this offshore wind as we all want to see. So the combination of both using vessels, but also helicopters, drones even, and whatever technology can bring us is very important. Logistics is like at the core of what we do in operations, and that's also where I hope that being here in Gippsland, we can really like take the best from existing industries and bring it in to the offshore wind.
Great, thank you. We've got time for one more question before we hand over to the panel. What specific sorry, it's just jumped around. What specific workforce challenges have you faced in Australia, and how do you combat them?
So far, of course, I think we have had very little challenges because we are still building up also our teams and organization. But let me use the example of Taiwan, because I don't think it would be that much different. I think in many ways it's like we got to introduce a new industry in Taiwan, and when I started kind of hiring people with very different and diverse skill sets, quite some years ago, actually I brought people in on good attitude and motivation, and it all starts with that, because I think I can skill develop people in whatever direction is needed, and that's also why we bring people early on board. So again, the motivation, the engagement, and the real positive attitude of joining this industry is essential. So it might sound very kind of romantic, but actually that's what we experienced of saying like people generally come with all their unique skill sets and experience, and then mixing that up and hopefully with applying more skills to them as they come on board. That are at least that's what we expect and hope also when we start onboarding and getting a larger workforce here in Gippsland.
Great, thanks, Andreas. To hand over to the panel now with Eloisa, please join me in thanking Andreas for his presentation today. And I'll now hand over to Eloisa. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Fantastic. Oh, thank you very much. I acknowledge the land of the Briakalong, land that we gather on today, the Gunai-Kurnai people. I pay my respects to their past elders, present and emerging, and I thank them for the land in which I live, work and I play. It's so lovely to see so many faces here after lunch. We hope you've had a nice little rest outside in the nice fresh air. My name is Eloisa Tripodi, and I'm a creative producer with Nanu Nanu, and I know so many of your names. If you have registered as an event organiser, we get to see all of your names come our way, and now I see lots of faces. So if I yell out a name during today's presentation, feel free to give us a little wave. Welcome to the session this afternoon on international lessons in offshore wind for Gippsland. Wind. Well, I'm not a professional in wind, but our panel today absolutely have expertise and knowledge. We can't see wind, but we can feel it and we know the effects of it, as the last few days have demonstrated. And usually the only thing that I know is how my hair reacts to a windy day. So, I have absolute pleasure this year of travelling to Spain for a Wind Europe conference, and we were immersed in the world of wind, the structures and the supply chain discussions, and the investment in energy. So to start today's session, we're just going to show you a very short clip of some really great little grabs from conversations that we had whilst we were over in Spain.
Not making our mistakes our own mistakes, but like learning from European mistakes, from Netherlands mistakes, from Denmark mistakes, from German mistakes, etc.
But it might be a smart idea to do some central planning, which is far ahead looking, since offshore is huge investments and long lead time items. So you might already plan for not only generation 1, but maybe generation 2 and 3 already in your scope that you want to build for offshore.
Be aware that the need is there in order to have the different fields developed. If that brings in the educational sector or if that brings in different ministries, because of course the support is needed from all sides, from the industry and also from our side, and speaking as an investor but also as a developer. If we all work separately but we don't align, it's obviously a very difficult it's a challenge to overcome.
Well, I think one of the big challenges regarding supply chains in Germany and Europe is the whole part of investments. We need new investments in supply chains.
So from international conversations to our very own conversations here in Gippsland, today you're in for a real treat with a panel of knowledge when it comes to wind, both here in Australia and internationally. And in a moment, joining me on stage, right here in Gippsland, on our G-Neck auditorium stage, we have Morgan Rossiter from Clean Energy Victoria, Andreas Munk-Janson from Orsted Asia Pacific, Paleo Rodriguez from Ocean Winds, Anil Chinana from Gerinex Parkwind, Penny Pickett from Choreo Generation, Miles Daniel from Southerly 10, Jim Rykes from Iberdrola Australia, and Rory van Wiedenberg from Gippsland Skies. What a stage full of knowledge we have. This is the place to be. So today's session, we've got an hour, which is fantastic, and I'll just let you know how it's going to work. We're going to hear from each of our panellists, and following that, we'll discuss things that they've talked about. There's also a live poll that's gone out, which we've had great feedback on, so we'll discuss some comments from the live poll. We're taking questions from the audience via the Hoover app, which you've been familiar with for the morning. So I encourage you to use that, and those conversations will generate for the next hour. If in the event we don't get to discuss something that has been listed or one of your questions, we do encourage you to please reach out to any of our panellists via the app, and over the next day and a half you're welcome to gather, have a cup of coffee and discuss any of the points that you might like to know. So, it's magic time. Look at these 8 people looking a little bit nervous. So what we pose to everybody is a 2-minute moment of magic. And what makes it magic is that what they're going to talk about is something you haven't heard of from them before, because you cannot find it on their website, nor can you find it in their bio. But you are encouraged to have a look on the app at both of those things, if that helps you form your questions for today. So, our first person who is going to give us some magic is Morgan Rossiter. I'd love a sound effect. Let's do that again.
Ooh.
Give her a round of applause.
Thank you, Eloisa. I was waiting for the sound effect there. So as Eloisa said, my name's Morgan Rossiter. I'm the Director of Offshore Wind at the Clean Energy Council. And the Clean Energy Council is the peak industry body for all renewables in Australia. So we cover everything from solar, large scale to small scale, hydro, hydrogen, onshore wind, offshore wind. We cover it all. But myself, I lead our policy and advocacy for offshore wind. One of the things that we set up last year was the Australian Offshore Wind Task Force, and that was to coordinate the industry. There's so much growth happening in the industry. We need to figure out how to best coordinate and collaborate the industry. So we set up the task force, and one of the key deliverables is to figure out the ongoing structure of how, as an industry body, we can support all the participants in the offshore wind industry to do the best they can to collaborate and coordinate and be informed. So why I wanted to share this today was sort of a bit of a call to action. One of the things we're looking to consider is how to best bring in all the different stakeholders that are in the offshore wind industry. So that's everyone from fisheries, communities, future workforce. So what I really want to get out of this session and the conference, the rest of the conference, is understanding, from everyone at this conference, how do you want to be engaged as a stakeholder? How, as the peak body for offshore wind nationally, can we be coordinating with everyone in this room, everyone in the Gippsland community, and the whole offshore wind industry? So I look forward to sharing sort of some experiences today, but also chatting with many of you over the next couple of days. Thanks, Eloisa.
Thank you. Great. Our next moment of magic is Andreas Munk-Janson from Orsted, Asia Pacific.
Thank you very much. Yeah, normally I wouldn't work with magic myself, but maybe this moment is just magic for me in itself. So actually, you know what, let me start pulling yourself a month back, because actually I was traveling the roads of Gippsland together with my family, my 3 kids and my wife back in July. And somehow I realized that it was exactly 25 years since I put my first feet on the ground in Australia. As a young civil engineer, I came to Sydney at that point, and I had expected to have an internship at a big engineering company, but realized that no one really was looking for me. So basically, I had to go out and find another job, and I got to actually work for a huge contractor called Transfield, who employed me as an engineer, working with a team that did flooding tunnels following storms. So to me, it kind of went back, all of it, when I heard about the huge storms that has been passing this area for the last 2 weeks almost, or 10 days at least. And somehow I felt that what I experienced and what I was in Australia for 25 years ago had some kind of a climate, environmental kind of flavor to it. And now I'm back, and hopefully I'm able to contribute in a different way, but still from a kind of climate, environmental impact perspective. So yeah, that was my own magic moment. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. And now from Ocean Winds, we have a little bit of magic from Paleo Rodriguez.
The sounds effects are great. Really nice to be with all of you. Thank you for organizing this. When I was asked to do this 2-minute magic moment, I was wondering what to say, because basically the way we start always presenting is explaining our projects and things like that. What you can find in our website is right now we are around 600 people in Ocean Winds. What you cannot find is that we start 5 years ago being on roughly less than a little bit above 100 people. So we have grown exponentially for the last 4 years. We're still a young company. We start being a baby now. We're kind of a toddler. And we have been growing not only internally as a company, and particularly these 2 years for the whole industry has been a tough period, but also thanks to all the suppliers. I think something that comes up to what we are discussing today here, right? Starting a new business. Also to all the communities and stakeholders that are involved in the projects that we are now, for example, operating. All the people are involved, not only as direct employees of Ocean Winds, but all the community and everything that regards offshore is just much more than a company. It's much more than than us. It's just the future of our kids, the future of us, and in a climate that is correct. We are looking forward to use the wind, although we are shocked. I landed yesterday, and it must maybe too much wind, in fact. But yeah, thank you so much, and it's not too magic, but I try to give some flavor. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay. I now would like to go to Anil Chanana from Geranax Park Wind.
Is it working? Yep. Anil Chanana, country head for Parkwind Geranax. I would like to say I started with Parkwind 2 years ago, but now I'm part of Geranax, which is a new company launched by Gera Group back in April. With that comes a very large financial platform capability which Geranax now provides to our offshore wind business to expand our operations in many countries, which includes Australia. So Geranax is not just focusing on offshore wind, it is also focusing on other renewables, onshore wind, solar, and battery, a capability which would officially launch very soon in Australia as well. With the award of a feasibility license in the Gippsland Blue Mackerel, we just launched our website for that project during this conference earlier this morning. So we are very excited that we are becoming part of this Gippsland community with our first 1 gigawatt wind farm. Now, Geranax is, even though it was announced recently, with its operations and portfolio from Gera Group Japan and Parkwind's offshore wind asset, it already has an operating portfolio of 3.5 gigawatt in many countries, and it has a pipeline of 10 gigawatt of projects in various stages of development, which includes our Gippsland project, Blue Mackerel, as well as projects on which we are waiting to find out decision on the feasibility license. For example, the Spinifex project, which we are bidding jointly with Alinta Energy in the Southern Ocean. I think the point I want to highlight as a magic moment, I guess I feel the magic by being part of this great company now, that the capability and the experiences which we are going to bring from our international learnings to play for the benefit of the Gippsland communities, as well as other future zones we are targeting to develop offshore wind farms as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I really love saying this name. This is Penny Pickett from Choreo Generation.
Thank you, Eloisa. Hi all, I'm Penny Pickett from Choreo Generation. I am Head of Australia. It's great to be here in Gippsland today talking about one of my most favourite topics. I bore many people about offshore wind at dinner parties and things like that, so it's great to be here in Gippsland talking about offshore wind today, and that's definitely part of the magic. What some people probably don't know about me is I'm actually a marine biologist by trade. I've been lucky enough to have been working in offshore wind for the last 15 years, 10 years in the UK and the last 5 years here in Australia. And I must say that when I was working in the UK and I was thinking about going home, I'd been away for 12 years and I really was ready to move home. I genuinely thought there was no career for me in offshore wind back in Australia. And so fast forward 5 years and it's just amazing to see. It's very magic to see how far we have come. For those who are new to offshore wind, Choreo Generation is developing the Great Eastern Offshore Wind Project here in Gippsland. Choreo Generation is a leading international offshore wind developer with a global pipeline of 30 gigawatts. Something that some people might not know is that we are actually Australian-owned as a wholly owned portfolio company of McColl Asset Management. And my magic moment was more to think about the kind of, the lessons learned and things like that. So when I was reflecting on this panel today and, what we could come and talk about, I think where the magic can really be made in Gippsland, given the scale of the projects that have been awarded and what we're trying to achieve in the next decade, is really about collaboration. I think there is many challenges ahead of us, but I think with those challenges comes the opportunity for, amazing collaboration. And I think in a mature market like the UK, it took years for collaboration to happen, But I just think we're light years ahead here in Australia. We're already collaborating on many scales. So yeah, I think that's the magic that can happen in Gippsland.
Thank you. Thanks, Penny. And we have Miles Daniel from Southerly 10.
Hi, Miles Daniel from Southerly 10 with focus on Star of the South project. I stumbled into offshore wind in 2011 in Denmark, built projects all over Europe, and I guess saw the magic that developed when a pipeline of projects finally got released. So in Denmark, having people, suppliers going from project to project after those first projects got away. Saw that again in the UK in the 2010s. And then took a detour to the US and did a demonstration project in 2020. And in early 2021, most people were at home due to COVID. I actually couldn't get to my office because I lived in a different country and couldn't get there. My secretary said, hey, there's a letter here for you from the United States Department of the Interior. And I thought, Jesus Christ, what do they want? We'd handed over the project. Nothing had gone wrong. And it was a box full of coins that they had made to commemorate our project. And it had a line in there that I'll never forget, that it said that, these big milestones for a country only happen the first time once. And I think I had that same magic moment last year when the same day the FLAs went in for Gippsland. We were down at Barry Beach Marine Terminal with the geotechnical vessel doing the safety induction. We had Australian crew over there, some specialists from overseas, and then we went out and did the first offshore geotechnical campaign in Australia for offshore wind, and I thought, wow, this is a magical moment. And I think, like I've seen everywhere else in the world, once you start getting those first campaigns away, more of them come, they're done safer, you can get more local people working on them, they become more efficient. So that's the magic that I'm looking forward to in Australia as well.
Great, thank you. Handing over the baton to Jim Rikes from Iberdrola, Australia.
Good, working. Good afternoon, everyone. So I've been asked today to come and share my thoughts about offshore wind lessons for Gippsland. Now, although I've spent 5 years in offshore wind, my experiences in Australia are relatively new, about 18 months, but I've only actually been living here now 2 weeks. So yeah, quite a interesting story compared to the other panelist. Now, as a Dutch native with a British accent, newly in Australia, you could argue that I'm a perfect candidate for a Pommy Upstart label. But yeah, I'll give it a good go. Now, rather than presenting myself as an expert and coming here to tell lessons to Gippsland, I think my angle will be more sharing with you mistakes that I've seen made in other markets that I've worked that are definitely worth avoiding and will set Gippsland up for success in the future. So my name is Jim Rikes. As I said, I'm an expat Dutchman, an engineer by trade, technical manager by profession, but really I'm a fisherman at heart. So good to be in Australia for that as well. Now, I started my career in East Anglia. And you might wonder, well, how did a Dutchman end up in rural England? Like potentially many in the room today, my old man worked in oil and gas. In fact, he worked on the Lehman field in the North Sea, which ended up being just 50 kilometers north of where I started my career with the East Anglia 1 wind farm off the coast of East Anglia. Now, I've spent my whole career with Iberdrola, which I'm really proud of, and part of the reason for that is because of the skills strategy that we as an organization put at the very center of our offshore wind efforts. In 2017, with the construction of East Anglia 1, we had just shy of 3,500 jobs sustained throughout the construction period. Subsequently, we've continued to have up to 100 permanent jobs, high-skilled jobs, at our operations facilities in Lowestoft, the coastal town there. We've engaged over 3,000 students across the entire education spectrum, sponsored 10 master's scholar students at the local university, and alongside that, that momentum allowed us to build out our first apprenticeship program, of which we've now had 4 successful iterations. Time's up.
It's your 2 minutes.
I'll pass over.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And our last presentation of magic is from Rory van Wiedenberg from Gippsland Skies.
Yeah, thanks, Eloisa, and great pronunciation there. So I'm Rory van Wiedenberg, Project Director for Gippsland Skies. For those that aren't familiar with Gippsland Skies, we're a joint venture of 4 shareholders, and that's Mainstream Renewable Power, Reventus Power, AGL and Direct. So in there we've got 2 very Australian companies and 2 international developer/investors. So we're in a really privileged position of being able to draw on the kind of local Australian and in fact local Gippsland expertise there from that part of the consortium, and obviously a lot of lessons learned from international projects from the other half of the consortium. I started my career working nearly a decade in WA for a big oil and gas operator doing subsea construction and well intervention projects. And back in 2016, I kind of took the decision that my time was up in oil and gas and I wanted to make an effort to move across into the renewables industry. I'd spent my entire career working in offshore projects and it was really all I knew, so I wanted to stay connected to the offshore industry. Now, at that time, there was very, very little happening in Australia around offshore renewables, so I took the decision to move myself over to Europe to try and get into offshore renewables through the more mature markets over there. As part of that journey, I ended up joining a company called Aker Offshore Wind, based in Norway, which has since been merged into Mainstream Renewable Power, which is how I've come into the Gippsland Skies project. And in joining Aker Offshore Wind at the time, I worked across a large number of our live development projects in both Europe and Asia, but I also had responsibility for doing new market assessments and pitching where we should be putting our efforts into adding sort of new pipelines into the development portfolio. So doing that around 3 years ago, we really couldn't get Australia to crack the top 10 markets in our priority list by any way of using the metrics. And I had a hell of a time trying to get resource justified to actually, make an effort into poking into opportunities down here. So for me, the magic is really to be sitting here 3 years later, not just one of 12 feasibility licence holders, but knowing that for all 4 of our shareholders, this is really a priority market, and I think that's a testament to the hard work that's been done.
Give them a round of
just
applause.
as planned.
Thank you. And each person did only get 2 minutes of magic. It started with 1 moment of magic, but we extended it. So please, a huge round of applause for our panellists for sharing. From any of those very short discussion points, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them through the question feed if it's specifically for somebody, and I can navigate the questions to there. We're going to open up firstly to open our discussion around the poll that went out. I have a trusty side assistant. Oh, round of applause. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, it can be a bigger round of applause. He does a pretty good job. So, oh, thank you. I'd love the poll. Fantastic. So, one of the questions that we had was, what are the challenges in Gippsland? No, that's not what I want. Let's start this again. I want to go to my poll. Trusty assistant, there it is. Fantastic. One of the poll questions that we have was, what is missing as part of the conversation about wind energy production in Gippsland? And some of the results that we had, that you can also see on your app as well, is we had answers such as timing of the grid, collaboration, location, local fishing, importing parts, community voice, which links into our community engagement, skills gap, those impacted, redundancy, home services. So anybody on the panel, we might open it up to anybody who would like to start, which is very nerve-wracking, I'm sure. What is missing as part of the conversation about wind energy production in Gippsland? You may turn and have a look at anything behind you, or you may have your own response through your own experience through your organisation or to date. What do you think is missing to date here in Gippsland? Who wants to take us off?
I mean, I can, if you want. I think.
Big round of applause for the starter.
I'm sitting right next to you, so it's hard
That'd
to
be
hide.
great. I was about to tap you on the shoulder, so it's worked out well.
Oh, look, for me, I mean, this is a super useful list for us to have. I mean, we're, not to speak for the group, but as developers, obviously probably blind to some of the things that the community thinks that we need to do better or that we might be missing. So I don't necessarily have any comments on the list that's there behind us, but I think it's a great thing for us to take away and be aware of. And obviously, you know, we're here, we as Gippsland Skies have a booth over in the exhibition hall, so if anyone does want to have a chat through anything on the list, please do stop by and be more than happy to do so.
Great, thank you. Penny?
I'm happy to add to that. I'm trying to put a theme together from all the different words, and the one that kind of jumps out to me is probably supply chain and you know, local workforce training and things like that. I think that there's really great opportunity for us as developers to come together. You know, we're all, you know, we've only just very recently been awarded feasibility licenses, and I think we've all been looking to develop the local supply chain on an individual project by project basis. We now have a Gippsland developers group called Offshore G12 or OG12, and I think through that forum there's a really great opportunity for us to come together and actually do some of these as, you know, industry within the region. I think that there's, we don't need to be repeating, you know, meeting with universities and TAFE and applying that skills transfer and building local skills capacity. I think we can do it more meaningfully if we do it together. So I think that there's a real opportunity there for us to do that in future.
Thank you. Good. I think a round of applause. Our panel also has not seen everybody's responses until this very moment, so it's a little bit hidden from them.
On the spot panel.
It's an on the spot for the responses. I think I'd like to just probably take out a couple of the key ones that we've seen here. You did mention collaboration, Penny. Is there anybody else that wants to make comment in regards to collaboration? Because in this list, it's saying that that's what they think is missing. Is there anything that could probably be shared that highlights collaboration happening that anybody wishes to share with us?
I mean, I'm happy to go, but you're putting it to the rest of... Does anyone else want to have a go? Okay. I think we're doing a lot in the collaboration space. It's actually, some of it is quite new, so people in Gippsland may not quite be aware of some of the work that we're doing. But I think collaboration is really starting to happen. I mentioned the developers working group. Obviously, Morgan is the what's your official role? The
Offshore Wind Task Force? Or the Directorate?
No, your actual role.
Oh, my Director of Offshore Wind.
Director of Offshore Wind for the Offshore Wind Task Force, and I think there's a lot going on in that space. We have working groups, and maybe Morgan can touch upon that in a minute, but we also, what I'm really pleased to see in terms of the collaboration space is that we're starting to engage really well as developers. There's a real push now from government. We've got our new Gippsland Licence Holders Advisory Committee across federal government, and we're also involving state government in that. And so I think that there is a lot of opportunity now to collaborate across all the key challenges in the market, and you know, fisheries, funding, you know, lots of the different things that have been picked up. There is an opportunity for us to really come together and do it in a united front rather than at a project level, and that really prevents stakeholder fatigue.
Thank you. Thanks for answering both of those questions. Really appreciated. Jim, did you want to say something?
Yeah, can I add to the collaboration side of things? And I'll draw on, I guess, some lessons that have been successful in Scotland recently. So I think naturally, a lot of people have drawn parallels between what's happening in Gippsland with the declared area and the licenses being awarded to what happened a few years back with the ScotWind leasing round. However, Scotland has been, I guess, struggling to get those projects through the cycle and really built and connected. And in large part, that's down to the supply chain as well. And you know, that's clearly one of the topics, although I've only been here a few weeks, that I hear cropping up a lot. And so they've set up called the SIM, I think it's the strategic industrial model. Someone can correct me if not. But effectively, it's the government who have got a consultancy, the developers feed into that, and their sole purpose is to find areas of the supply chain, both on a high level and then on a more granular perspective, what Scotland's really good at, how it can scale up that supply chain for the offshore wind sector for volumes of offshore wind that's to come. And there's that central kind of collaboration piece between developers to go, where is Scotland going to position itself in the supply chain? And that's something I think that here in Gippsland we are starting to do with a number of different bodies, but I think is an area where we can collaborate more as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Morgan.
Thanks, Eloisa. And maybe I'll just build on some of the points Penny raised about the work the CEC does, and especially the Offshore Wind Task Force. The collaboration piece is definitely something we heard loud and clear last year, and one of the things that sort of led to the task force was going, well, how can we bring together all of industry? Originally, when we were setting up the task force, we did want to bring in all different stakeholders, but that really was a very, very large number. So where we landed on was having developers with announced projects, state and federal government, and the regulator, which still was quite a large number. But we set up with just that group so we could start working through what are those opportunities for collaboration and coordination. And once we've sort of established that sort of foundation, how can we then start to look at making sure we're bringing in all those stakeholders? And that's sort of what I touched on too with my magic minute, is going, well, now we're at that phase of going, well, what is the best structure and how do we make sure we capture such all the different perspectives from so many different stakeholders? A great lesson, or something we've seen work really well, is in the UK with the Offshore Wind Industry Council, or OWIC. This is a model we hear from a lot of developers. They say that's sort of the, a bit of a gold standard, and has worked really well. And why that's been so successful is it has sort of government buy-in at the top and industry sort of working together really, really closely. So that's something we're looking at. How could we replicate a similar model like that here in Australia? And if there's anyone from the federal government in here today, this is another reminder of the importance of getting that government buy-in with a national body, because we think that's a really great way to get rigour and ensure that we can be proactively removing the barriers and enhancing the opportunities as quickly as we can, but at the same time making sure we're really getting all the different perspectives into it. And I might just quickly touch on, the words keep moving around. Where was the one? It was a bit on reality, but the clear story. I just wanted to touch on that one because I can really appreciate how confusing a completely new industry can be, and it's not just in Gippsland, it's sort of Australia-wide. And so the CEC is leading a piece of work to help really bring that narrative together. It's called the Why for Offshore Wind, and what we're looking to do is deliver a business case for offshore wind so we can really clearly look at what are the different benefits from offshore wind at sort of a national perspective, and hopefully go down to some regional examples as well. But the idea behind that is to be able to have a really clear story. So a clear story we can communicate to all sides of government, but also a really clear story that we can talk to international investors and suppliers, and we can talk to the regions about as well. So hopefully, as that sort of work is progressed later this year, we can start to, add to a couple of those missing parts of the conversation.
Great, thank you. And thank you to everyone who contributed to the response to that question. So thank you to everyone. I'm going to move on. This was a nice little curly one. Australia shouldn't look to Europe to learn about creating an offshore wind industry. We are our own island. So we had an agree or disagree. And in that, 92 out of 102 disagreed with that statement, and we had a very small pool of people who did agree. So from our panel, I'll head across to Andreas. If you'd like to respond, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I think I also mentioned in my speech before, it's like, but let me start by saying steal with pride. It's like, and Gippsland, Australia should just steal whatever they can. From all the mistakes and all the successes that has been in Europe and UK and elsewhere, because that's where we fast track this, right? Like, let's be honest, like offshore wind is not rocket science. It's like, at least not on the project side, might be what leads up to the realization, installation and operation. And I do have a high respect for that. But when it comes to this, it's like if we ever try to make ourselves unique And obviously I've been doing it in many different places of the world now, and this uniqueness always seems to fall apart somehow. And that's where I say, again, steal with pride, because that's where we not just fast track, but that's also where we keep it simplistic. There's a lot of complex element to it, but let's try to make it simplistic as much as we can, and that's where, again, I'm one of the 94 here that disagree.
Great. Would you like to add to that, Miles?
Yeah, I'll double down on that as well, because, I mean, if you do your Googling about how they do offshore wind in Europe, it is different in every single country, the regulatory regime, everything. I think, you know, my experience in the US, when I walked into that project, I expected them to be insular, reject everything that was not from their continent. It was refreshing because it was the exact opposite. They were stealing everything they could with pride. There was some things that were not to be touched, and that is the same with every country, but really you see things getting ahead in the US because they've just been so adopting, trying to bring in everything that they don't have in their own country to get their own industry going.
Great, thank you.
Just a quick one to add on. We don't have time to come up with our own creative ways to do everything. Last year in Australia, we had 1.3 gigawatts of new generation capacity reach financial close. In the first half of this year, we've had 1.6 gigawatts, but we need to be adding we need to see 6 to 7 gig each year reaching financial close till 2030 to hit our renewables targets. So there isn't time to sort of be, paving the way in a new way every time. We need to take those lessons where we can, and that's also a quick plug to the Clean Energy Council's quarterly 2 report out yesterday. Take a read if you want some more stats from that.
Thank you. Rory, did you want to say something to that?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, again, obviously, you know, learning from Europe doesn't mean you have to copy everything they do. You can also learn from failures and adopt and do it better. But it also doesn't need to be Europe because, you know, we're very close to Asia here in the APAC region, and, you know, from a supply chain perspective, I think we've got a lot to learn from recent offshore wind projects there as well.
Dare I ask if anyone agrees, if anyone on this panel wants to go with that one? No, great. But Anil, would you like to add to it?
Yes, I think it's true that there is a lot to learn and apply from more mature jurisdictions who have been developing and implementing offshore wind farms. But having said that, like any jurisdiction, there are going to be unique challenges, and that applies to Gippsland as well. For example, the presence of carbonate soils here, which is going to require a customized solutions in terms of foundations. And the other thing is, given the environmental conservation and unique marine mammals and birds found in Australia, I think the environmental planning and consenting process need to be streamlined. So there is a lot we can learn from the international jurisdictions, but what would this mean for Australia? That needs to be customized.
Valid point, really good. Penny?
I think it's also just worth noting, you know, if you take the Victorian government as an example and kind of like the legislation and policy that they've put in place to support offshore wind, they have been really amazing at going out to market and going out to industry and consulting with people to get all the lessons learnt, to get all the feedback, to hear what's been done well overseas, to hear what's not been done so well overseas. And then they've used all of that to put together some pretty solid legislation and policy. And so I think that that's probably a really good example of how they have used lessons learnt from overseas, reached out to all of us within developers and industry, and then come up with some pretty solid policy to help support us delivering our projects.
Yeah, great. Beautiful. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, and our last one from our poll. International offshore wind has greater opportunity to teach us what? And this got a great uptake. If we've got that on the screen, thank you. But I'll read some out. The lessons learnt, which is what Penny just touched on. What not to do, really valid point that was made earlier. Structural design, innovation, material science, and overall O&M approach. Training needs to be done. How to live with offshore wind in our landscape without fear, which is a great one. How to get on with it, how to dispose of turbines, lessons learned, how to develop supply chain capacity in a strategic way ahead of demand, what works and doesn't work, the mistakes that have been made, pitfalls to avoid, how to set up correctly so that we have a supply chain, and a couple of collaboration points here: innovation and resilience, and recycling wind turbines afterwards. In anyone's experience that they've had to date, in response to this particular list, what is it that our greater community can learn from all of this? What does it teach us? Anil.
I think, look, there are many things we can learn from what has been applied and tested in other countries. But I think when we look at offshore wind, one of the most expensive cost area is the operations and maintenance phase of the wind farms. Depending upon the type, the distance of the offshore wind farm project, it could range anywhere from 28 to 40%. Now, Park Wind, I can talk about some of the lessons learned here, which Park Wind can bring for Gippsland offshore wind farms, is how they are managing a portfolio of their offshore wind farms with some of the best and efficient practices to cut the cost down but maximize the number of jobs there for the coastal communities. And they're doing so by standardizing the make of the turbines. So they basically source all their turbines from one OEMs, which streamlines and makes the maintenance of these turbines more efficient. Also, perhaps sharing the SOVs, which is the operations vessels, service operations vessels or crew transfer vessels across multiple developers. So for example, here in Gippsland, we talked about collaboration. So a number of developers could perhaps set up an O&M hub, which would not only maximize the local jobs, but which would make it also possible for the developers to share the cost as well. So this is one area where not only we can maximize the local jobs, the skilling, upskilling, but as well as also creating a win-win business model for a number of developers who are looking to collaborate there together.
Yep. Paleo, did you want to say something?
Sometimes you go to the supermarket and they give you 3 per 1. I'll try to answer or to comment on the 3 points because I have not spoken. I will say on the first question, we're talking about things that are under conversation. Overall, and applies to all of them, I'm maybe too optimistic, but I think maybe we have bottlenecks and issues that are missing, but not in the conversation. I think everything's been touched. I think we're not losing sight of the most important critical things. And it also relates to the second question on being an island. It's as a continent, in fact, it's so big. But I think it's impossible to have a Galapagos mentality in this place because you have an advantage. I'm in charge of the APAC region, and only just the fact that you, together with New Zealand, you speak English is so useful and allows you to have this mobility. In this particular panel, you have people who have the experience themselves of living in Europe, of having been being face-to-face with the industry and in the UK or in other regions. And that's very helpful for the country. I mean, 18 months ago, the first time we were looking at Australia, 20 months ago, in my company, it was not on the map for offshore wind because offshore wind is the only thing we do. We do offshore wind. And now, after a little bit over 2 years, everything that you have accomplished is impressive. Of course, there's many things ahead of us, and that's fun. I mean, that's so good. It's a nascent industry in this country. But I think the message that I want to convey today is optimism. And regarding what can be learned from overseas, so the last question, international offshore, that a great opportunity is that you can, as mentioned before, cherry pick what works for you best. And I think maybe, as mentioned, too optimistic, but it's true that you have a lot of things that can you do here, and particularly in Gippsland, this is going to be the spearhead of the whole industry. And it will be the footprint that will replicate, hopefully, in other regions and states. So, yeah, very positive on most of the things that have been said, and mostly agreeing with, I think, quite boring panel because we all agree.
Not at all.
Yeah, maybe what I'm about to say is contradicting what I said before about stealing with pride, because I think tweaking a few words here is actually what we can learn here is learning those practices that we want to do better. So I hate to disappoint you, but like we're still a young industry, and there's very few best practices. There's good practices, but very, very few best. And that's where, when I go to, as I've said, like spending 5 years in Taiwan, sending everyone from my Taiwanese team abroad, and they come back and feel disappointed. And because they didn't find that best practice. And I say, okay, let's do it ourselves. Let's create that best practice. And that's where I think the learnings from elsewhere in the world, we should bring that here, and then we will do it better. And thereby we create the best practices. That's at least how I see it, and how I also expect it to be. So maybe a bit of tweaking here, but yeah.
Lovely, thank you. I'm going to probably fit in 2 of these lovely list of questions that we have here. But moving on from that, how long did it take to build the local workforce in the experiences that you've had beyond Australia? How long has it taken?
You need a project. You can't build a workforce if they don't have anything to work on. And I think that's really the difficult part in the industry, the stage we are now, that there's going to be a lot of deep development activities now. That is an opportunity to bring in some people that have never done that before, and then they'll work up to the bigger stuff that will come later. I think we need projects, but I think we need the projects because obviously it'll be a lot of tier 1 OEMs, contractors. Every country they go to, they don't bring their workforce with them. They're always looking up who are the subcontractors, who knows how to do that in this area. And I think that's actually where we're going to start growing the workforce. It's a lot of businesses that probably already exist in Gippsland today, and it's going to be us connecting the dots when we have projects so that they are training people to work on those projects as subcontractors to the big contractors that do this sort of work.
Thank you. Penny?
I'm not sure if this is answering the question, but building on from what Miles was just discussing, is that I think we also shouldn't be shy of the fact that, you know, there will be, you know, during the construction phase, we will rely on overseas suppliers, because I think, you know, in the operations phase, there is such great opportunity for local content, and where offshore wind differs from other renewable energy technologies is the O&M phase is actually quite expensive and quite, you know, it's quite involved in terms of O&M, and so actually as a result, there's really great local job opportunities. And so I think that even if we just focus on building the skills capacity for the O&M phase, that still ends up being a really large component of the full expenditure across the life cycle of the project.
Yeah, I think agreeing with what Penny just said and what I mentioned earlier, we need to plan how do we get ready for that O&M phase, even though we are in the development stage, early stage, and we have to reach our respective financial investment decisions before we get into the construction phase. But training the local workforce, providing them the education, bringing all the training and associated infrastructure in place for this workforce to get ready, I think that's the great opportunity for this offshore wind industry in the Gippsland region. Imagine if it's going to happen over time. Not all 12 projects will reach financial investment decision at the same time. It's going to happen as a stream of projects over 10 to 15 years. And that's going to bring the confidence and the continuity for the workforce in the Gippsland region for the O&M phases, which is going to last 30 plus years for each project, yes.
Jim?
I guess putting some numbers to stuff, and it's kind of what I introduced at the start as well. I started at my local university in the UK in 2014, and kind of was approached by our UK subsidiary initially, who were explaining the kind of work that they were doing off the coast. 4 or 5 years later, 2019, I joined Iberdrola and was in their office in London, working amongst a team of hundreds of people focused on constructing this project. And still, like Anil and the others are saying, we now still have a lot of people working on this project as permanent jobs to keep this facility running for at least 30 years.
Great. Andreas?
Yeah, no, also just to be very specific on the numbers, 5.2 years it takes. No, like joke aside, I think I represent the O&M phase operations, and at least in a new market, it approximately, from our view, takes those 5 year plus minus to build a workforce that can operate and maintain these wind farms. A positive thing is, of course, if we then see more projects and more wind farms coming along, we reduce that time. So, of course, as again with the example of Taiwan, but I could also use UK, because we have also built clusters in UK. But in Taiwan, we are getting to a cluster operation, and again, that's where I potentially reduce it from 5 years to expand the organization with additional 2 years, and then I actually have a full cluster operation organization. So it's in that sense, again, only focus on the O&M. I will not touch upon the installation part, but for the O&M, it's in a new area, a new market, new industry evolving. It's in that sense approximately those 5 years.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to have a magic moment sound any moment, because our hour is up. I'm not sure how that happened so quickly. I knew that was going to happen. So this lovely collation of questions, we will get to our panel. You can find any one of these people over the next day and a half around, and also there is a representation over in the exhibition area. So please do go down there and have a conversation. What an absolute pleasure to grace the stage with knowledge around offshore wind, Gippsland and internationally. Can you please give our panel a huge round of applause?
We'll get into it while people are slowly coming in and leaving. Hopefully more coming in than leaving. But welcome to my hometown of Traralgon, Gunnar Kurnai Nation of the Brayakrlang people. I hope you're enjoying your stay with us. The name Traralgon actually comes from the Aboriginal words of Tara, meaning river, and Algon, meaning little fish. So I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the grounds in which we meet and wider Gippsland, including its waters. It's hard to imagine life here 60,000 years ago with the beginning of the world's oldest known culture. The growth in the world in the past few generations is nothing short of unbelievable, which has created some challenges. However, it's exciting to think that these are the lands that can be used to help us bring climate change under control. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any whom are with us today. That's bright. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Glen McColl, an economic developer with Latrobe City Council. In my role, I'm driven by continual optimism. As our region navigates a period of transition, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and passive, but that's not the Latrobe way, and it's not the Gippsland spirit. We believe in aiming high, embracing bold strategies, and actively shaping our future. If we hesitate, we risk missing out on critical opportunities. A wise man once wisely quoted, "The key to economic prosperity isn't about protecting old jobs, but creating new ones." And these new jobs might look different and be spread across various sectors, which can be challenging to grasp. However, with effective change management, we can all share in the optimism, and change can be intimidating, but it's essential for the progress. A century ago, the power stations we rely on today were beyond imagination. Similarly, the new energy landscape may seem unclear, but history shows us that humanity rises to challenges by innovating and transforming. That's precisely what we're embarking on now. Just as SEC set ambitious goals a century ago and achieved remarkable results, we too must aim high. With careful planning, the benefits of our current efforts will extend far beyond the next decade, impacting generations to come. Projections suggest we could generate 50 plus gigawatts in the next 25 years off our Gippsland coast. While the state currently only needs around 18 gigawatts, it's crucial to define what our total needs are and set appropriate targets, which we're well underway of. What should developers do with this potential surplus of energy? While storage is one solution, we should also consider exports. As Australia phases out traditional exports, we can focus on green hydrogen, green steel and green metals. By reducing manufacturing costs and boosting production capabilities, we can invigorate our local economy again. While these ideas may seem ambitious, a clear vision is essential for achieving them. Our global attention is due to our potential to harness excess green energy from innovative solutions. These advancements will benefit not only Gippsland, but also the entire state and country. Currently, Australia exports significant amounts of black coal and gas. As these exports diminish, we must identify new global needs and opportunities. By focusing on emerging sectors, we can maintain a strong export position and contribute to global energy solutions. The future holds immense promise. The quest for new energy sources is fueling unprecedented innovation and adaptability. The opportunities before us are vast and achievable. However, it's crucial to balance ambition with feasibility to ensure sustainable progress. Geothermal, bioenergy, hydrogen, and nuclear each have potential roles in our future energy landscape. While the science behind these technologies is promising, further development and consideration are needed to integrate them effectively into Australia's energy strategy. Our challenge is to ensure Gippsland not only meets its own energy needs, but also supports global supply chains. To explore this further, we have assembled an exceptional panel of visionaries and practical experts, and today we'll engage in a meaningful discussion about what's possible and what's realistically achievable. So, speaking of optimism, this man had this think big mentality over a decade ago, which paved the way for where we are today. He's a visionary, a filmmaker with an incredible distant stare. He's an entrepreneur. Good laughter. No doubt a future Yarra mural. What does he see for a further 10 years' time? The co-founder and CEO of OceanX Energy, please welcome Andy Evans.
Look, it's great to see so many people, particularly over the last 2 years. I think GNEC's gone to a level that most people probably may not have foresaw. I think we had about 290 or so, Darren, in sale. I remember leaving the sale McDonald's at about 1:10 thinking it was a great day, but I never foresaw something of this size in such a short amount of time, particularly coming off the back of COVID. So for me, that tells a lot of the story about Gippsland. My background, which Glen briefly touched on, started about 12 years ago with Gippsland. I'm a Victorian, so I love every part of Victoria, and was always aware of Gippsland for many reasons, but had probably undersold its importance to Victoria, not just from an energy generation side, but also particularly from a mindset perspective. And certainly part of what I want to talk about today is just going to be very briefly around looking at Gippsland not only as a regional champion or a state champion, but also as a national and an international champion. I don't think a lot of people realise in the last decade or so, and what's going to happen in the next decade is really going to place Gippsland, not just really small components of it, on the map globally like it already has at the moment. Going back to my background more recently is in offshore wind. I'm one of the co-founders of the Star of the South with Peter Scardellis and Terry Callis. We came about 12 years ago in what we thought was a very innocent expedition. I was a very, very, very unhappy lawyer at the time, and I was looking for anything to get out of it. So offshore wind seemed like a really logical progression to get out of something really quickly. So we went to tour a wind farm, sat in the car park, realised it was really windy because we had a fishing map out on the bonnet trying to hold that down and say, yep, we're going to do something out there, and it hopefully will happen at some stage. But at that stage when we were thinking about what was to become the Star of the South, we had no idea certainly about multiple players and potentially multiple projects, but also I think what really gets these projects and regions going. And for me, it's got nothing to do with a great wind regime or connection to the grid. It's very much around the mindset of what capabilities really are. You don't power a state like Gippsland and Latrobe Valley have done for almost 100 years without having a bit of grit and determination. These projects are really hard work, they're really solid. And if you look at the life size of any or lifetime of any project, you look at the 50 years, say, of a coal mine, or more or less, depending on which side of politics you sit. What you don't see is the 10 to 20 years prior to that goes into the thinking and looking at how you can not only do it physically, but how you can provide hope and opportunity for a whole region. And I think that's been one of the great things for me in the last 12 years, is getting to understand the people of the valley and the Gippsland, noting they're all generally one, but don't mix them together too much, but understanding what makes the various areas tick. Gippsland's unlike a lot of other areas we go to. We spend a lot of time in the Hunter Valley and the Illawarra, down in Bunbury in southwest WA. You're looking at regions really that are spanned by probably only 100 to 200 square kilometres. So everything's fairly proximate and everybody knows each other really well, and there's a similar sort of mindset. I think the difference with Gippsland is it's a very disparate, well spread out area. You know, a lot of people looked at when we set up the Star of the South, why we always had Port Albert on the map. And for us, without telling a lie, it's because they had a great wine bar there. But we sort of realised very quickly, you can't pick and choose little parts of a region, you've got to pull it together. And despite the size of Gippsland, I think it's the size of Switzerland, it's amazing how people generally pull together really well. You can't run big industries like has happened with coal, and hopefully with offshore wind going forward, amongst many others that Glen has referred to, without there being a common sense of purpose and what you're on about. And I think one of the challenges, certainly for developers wanting to work in the area, but also supply chains, is actually being true to the fact that you are a guest and you're there to create opportunities for the people who own and live here and breathe here, and also who want their kids and grandkids to stay here for a long, long time. So from a regional perspective, it's been a delight to be here, particularly over the last 12 years, and it's fantastic to see the incredible companies who've now won licences in the first round of feasibility licences. 12 years ago, I would have been happy as a very unhappy lawyer and probably soon to be unemployed lawyer to think that not only would I have a prospect of a project going ahead, which the whole team at the Star of the South are doing brilliantly, but to have 10 incredible local and international companies who are all the world leaders, all with licences and all being committed to the next 7 years of development and then hopefully another 30 years of production is incredible. But looking broader beyond Gippsland, I don't think everyone's quite aware of the impact of Gippsland on the state of Victoria. I think it's only once you get into the energy industry and you start reading about things that you understand that, look, over 70% of electricity has come from Gippsland. I think people are only starting to realise when you come in and see some of the infrastructure, it's like, wow, that's how I get what I do and the electricity from down here. But going beyond that, I think you're sort of starting to see it around Australia as well. Gippsland is by far, obviously, in our little area of offshore wind, the leader, the benchmark. You look at 12 projects in Gippsland, we've got one in the Hunter Valley, which fortunately the Ocean X team won with our partners Equinor. But you look also at Western Australia, much smaller zones, because I think it's recognised it's not a shortfall in resource or capability, but it's really probably a shortfall in the mindset to really pull off large projects at what we're looking at doing. And this will be transformative for Victoria, not just from an electricity point of view or energy transition, but really life transition for a lot of people. I think a lot of the pleasure we've had in Gippsland the last 12 years is going out to a lot of the schools and seeing the delight of kids, not only looking at these, what I think are mystical pieces of infrastructure, but really looking at the future as to what they can do. It means they don't have to move to Melbourne or they don't have to move to other areas. They can actually stay with their sport teams and with their families and also raise their own families. Look, I think Andy McCarthy had a great story earlier, and it's a fantastic book. I encourage everyone to read Here Comes the Sun. But a lot of it's about longevity and continuity for families in particular. And Gippsland has all those hallmarks. Look, going on to the international stage as well, look, I get a lot of questions now. If you want to become somewhat semi-relevant, I really encourage making a film. It's expensive, but the most questions I get outside of making films is generally questions around Gippsland. If you're a European or a Scandinavian, it'll be called Gippsland, but everyone's learning. But most of the questions I still get, despite Ocean X and other stuff I've done, is always around Gippsland. Because when you do look at the international maps on energy and offshore wind, you don't get a little windmill placed in the heart of Victoria. It's always 3 hours to the southeast of Melbourne. So Gippsland is very firmly on the map. Look, and I think that's the challenge that we're all going to have over the next 10 to 15 years and well beyond, is that we've been gifted a great opportunity to go forward. The government's worked really well, look, realistically at a federal and a state level for about 10 years now. So we've now got the base of what we need to actually get out there and do it. We've got incredible companies that are now here doing it, and it's obviously not just Star of the South and Ocean X, but Corio, Nick will get up and speak soon as well. You've got financiers, the CFC and others truly on board with what we're seeking to do. Look, and for Australia, it's really reliant on a few key regions, and Gippsland is very much at the forefront of that. So, look, I really want to encourage everyone to look forward to the future. Yes, everything's a little bit scary, but we've got all the right players here who are here with the right intentions. And it's not intentions to exploit, it's about continuity of opportunity for as many people as possible. Look, it's great to see so many locals involved in these big projects. They're not big state or big national projects. These are big international projects. And everybody around the world looks to Australia, and particularly Gippsland, with a level of admiration and envy that we can actually pull off these projects and we embrace them. So look, thanks to Gippsland, thanks to Darren and everyone who's organised the conference. It's incredible. I know next year will be even bigger. So look, let's all enjoy the next few days together. Let's all reach out and speak to each other. I don't say collaborate that much because it's too formal. Let's just speak to everybody and really map out the opportunities together. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. So next up, with a name that had him destined for offshore wind or demolition or hairdressing, maybe, tasked with leading the state of Victoria in offshore wind development at OWEV as a Director for Partnership and Engagement, which includes development of an offshore wind supply chain. David Blowers is up next to blow your minds. David.
Thanks, Glen, for that introduction. I've not heard that before, but thank you. Sorry. Right, I'm here to basically talk about the opportunities that we have in offshore wind off the coast of Victoria, and particularly off the coast of Gippsland. And really, I'm going to start throwing some numbers at you, and then we'll start big, and then we'll come in small. So, back in December 2022, the Australian federal government announced the first declared offshore wind area in Australia, and that was off the coast of Gippsland. That's 15,000 square kilometres, and as my colleague Anne May said this morning, that's comparable to the areas that they have in the North Sea going forward. And to give you some comparisons with that, Andy just spoke about the area off Hunter. It's about 2,000 square kilometres. The area off Illawarra, that's about 1,000 square kilometres. And the other declared area, which is down in the southwest of this state, is about 1,000 kilometres as well. So it's really massive. And it's not just that 15,000 square kilometres, that directly underneath that and adjacent, there's the potential for the Tasmanian offshore wind zone, which could be up to another 10,000 square kilometres as well. As we've kind of spoken about, there's been 12 feasibility licences handed out in that Gippsland area, and there's the potential within those 12 licences to develop up to 25 gigawatts of offshore wind going forward. Now, obviously, those projects are still in early stages, and we've got to get through the feasibility processes, and it's likely that not all of those projects will be successful, but there's opportunity there. Now, what are we doing as the Victorian government? Well, we've become the first state in the country to actually legislate offshore wind targets. So we're actually going to try and get 2 gigawatts by 2032, 4 gigawatts by 2035, and 9 gigawatts by 2040. And so when you look at that from a supply chain perspective, we look at trying to produce about 1 gigawatt of offshore wind every year from about 2031 up to 2040. So what does that mean in terms of the opportunity for jobs, for skills, for growth going forward? Well, again, in terms of jobs, we've done the modelling on this, and for that 9 gigawatt, you're probably looking at in the region of up to 4,000 jobs during the development and construction phase. So those 4,000 jobs, they're going to be in development, including professional services. They're going to be in the manufacturing of components for those offshore wind farms potentially, and then in the actual construction of the offshore wind as well. And then once we get to the operations of those offshore wind farms, we're seeing up to about 1,700 jobs that will be ongoing, long-term, 30-year plus jobs. And Gippsland is really well positioned to service those. because for operations maintenance, the proximity that you have to the offshore wind zone is really critical to be able to deliver those jobs. So we really see great potential in the Barry Beach Marine Terminal and the other marine terminals of Corner Inlet to be able to provide those bases for O&M services going forward. And that means providing the basis for those jobs for O&M being here in Gippsland in part. In terms of jobs, the government's not kind of standing still as far as that's concerned as well. What we've recently done is we've come out with a request for information for the wind worker training sector, and anyone that's interested in looking at providing services for that should put in a submission to that, and that's about the scope and potential of that working centre going forward. We're looking at going through that, which will be a competitive process to provide that service, and looking to contract that at the end of next year. In addition to that, the Victorian Government are looking to put out the Victorian Energy Jobs Plan later next year, and that will also outline the pathways to develop the skills and training that we need for all renewable sector, but also specifically offshore wind going forward. Just finally, I want to just touch on some of those supply chain elements that I spoke about. So what does 1 gigawatt a year mean? Well, if you assume that we're going to be building something in the region of like 18 megawatt turbines going forward, it's roughly about 55 individual turbines per gigawatt. So for that 4 gigawatt target in 2035, that means we need basically 222 turbines in place. And that's not including the additional cables and cable laying that we need, the substations and transformers associated with that going forward. And it's really important to know that Victoria and Australia does have some real competitive advantages or benefits at the moment in providing those things. We already have steel fabricators in place, which has the potential to move into the provision of foundations, and that's potentially jacket foundations going forward. We have transformer companies, we have cable companies, but clearly they're not at the size that you'd look for offshore wind at the moment, but there is the potential. And what the Victorian Government's done around that is that they have already set their local content requirements for offshore wind companies going forward. And in the first instance, that's a requirement that 80% of staff during the operations and maintenance phase, and that's over the lifetime of the projects, have to be local. The second component of that is we are looking at businesses actually maximising the local content that they provide through our auction approach to be able to maximise the local content that we get in the development of our offshore wind. And during that process, we'll be looking also at how they use specific elements of local content, in particular steel, and also in particular with regional development and actually investing in the regions such as Gippsland. So that's just a little short summary of exactly what the opportunities are here, and I'd like to thank you for listening for this short period of time, and I'll hand back to Glen.
Thank you, David. I forgot to mention at the start about the Hoover app, so if you do have questions you want to pop in the app for later, the gents will be sticking around later to answer those questions. So next up, have you ever met a billionaire? Well, you still won't have after this next speaker, but Joe has $30 billion in his war chest ready to invest in the right clean energy projects. As if he wasn't already fending off new friends, he's just made a couple of hundred new ones. At the CEFC, Joe has already invested in renewable generation assets across Australia with a capacity of over 3 gigawatts. So please put your hands together for a warm welcome, Joe Harbour.
Thank you. And yes, not quite a billionaire, sorry to disappoint. And also not as eloquent a speaker as my fellow panellists, so I have got the assistance of some slides. They don't usually allow bankers in an audience this large, usually we're in a back room. So my name is Joe Harbour, and I have the unfortunate pleasure of having the title of Head of Wind. That's at the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, which is the Australian federal government's green bank, and yes, we do have over $30 billion of capital. Oh, we've got some graphics as well. They really thought I was boring. So the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, as I said, is the Australian federal government's green bank. We invest on behalf of you, the Australian taxpayer, to decarbonise the Australian economy. And I do say we invest. We're not a grant-giving organisation. We make an investment, and when that investment matures, we then reinvest that on the next project and keep pushing the next frontier to help decarbonise the Australian economy. So our sort of three main areas where we invest is renewable energy, in energy efficiency, and in low emissions technologies. But what I'm here to talk about is what we're doing, or what we have done in renewable energy, and our ambitions to expand that beyond traditional, or what we've got in Australia in large-scale solar PV, waste-to-energy, battery energy storage, and onshore wind, and our ambitions for offshore wind. Talking about the $30 billion, yes, we do have $30 billion in funding. We started about 11 years ago with $10 billion of funding, and very recently have gained these additional pots of capital that you see up on the screen, the most prominent of which is the Rewiring the Nation, the $19 billion to help fund the poles and wires and other supporting infrastructure that will help the renewables roll out to help us get to 82% renewable by the federal government target of 2030. There's a few interesting stats here, again, in case I'm too boring, but one of the key metrics here that we pride ourselves on is the financial sector leverage. So we're not trying to crowd out other financiers. Our job is to bring other financiers into new sectors. And the offshore wind sector has a lot of parallels with the large-scale solar industry. Sort of 10 years ago, there were a lot of doubters. There was a lot of questions. Is it cost too much? Will it ever get off the ground? Who will invest in it? And we played a fundamental role as the Clean Energy Finance Corporation on behalf of the Australian taxpayers, partnering with grant organisations like ARENA to help fund the first wave of large-scale solar projects in this country. And that's really just grown from there, and now it's sort of seen as common practice. And why would the Australian federal government have ever played a role there? I think we all know about the targets, and I mentioned the 82% is the key number here that we're all working towards. And I think to get to that, the key message is we need to use every tool in our arsenal. We need to use onshore wind, we need offshore wind, we need solar, we need battery, we need everything we can to get to there, and we need it all at once. Because I think Morgan gave a bit of a plug earlier for the Clean Energy Council's report, which was released yesterday, that really shows that we're tracking well below the levels of new capacity installed every year that we need to get to if we're going to get to 82% renewables by 2030. I'll skip through these. Just some things that we've done in wind. We haven't invested in offshore wind yet, but then again, there is no offshore wind coming out of the sea yet in Australia. But what we have done in onshore wind is we've committed over $1.7 billion to onshore wind. That's over 3 gigawatts of new wind generation in Australia. And the largest of which is that project, that beautiful, colourful picture there that we've deliberately cropped so you could imagine that it's on the ocean. That's the Golden Plains Wind Farm in Victoria. That's going to be, once complete, 1.3 gigawatts, the biggest onshore wind project in Australia. And we're incredibly proud of that project, and it's broken a lot of records in terms of scale. But when we talk about the scale of the offshore wind industry in Victoria, we're going to another level beyond that. These turbines will be 6.2 megawatts. In offshore parlance, that's their babies. I think we've already talked about 15, 18 megawatt turbines. We're really talking about another level of scale in offshore wind. And we as the CFC, we're looking at what role we can play to help fund the industry, what we can do to help fund the supporting infrastructure, what role we can play as an advocate, and what role we can play in those first wave of projects as projects start to come to the market and other people, other financiers sort of wait to see what happens with the first project. We're committed to rolling up our sleeves, looking at all the technical risks, learning from where they've been funded all around the world and being financiers to those first wind farms. So we look forward to, in 5 or 10 years' time, when the next technology wave comes round, talking about how we played a key role in offshore wind in Australia, like we have with large-scale solar. I just wanted to, the obligatory plug to other federal government funding bodies. We're not alone. So just give a couple of minutes to say there is also the National Reconstruction Fund, a newly formed $15 billion entity that's looking to help Australian manufacturing and to help build things in Australia. And I think we've seen some of the presentations today talk about the upcoming Future Made in Australia policy from the federal government. And also a shout out to ARENA, I've already mentioned them a number of times. They are the grant foundation or the grant giving organisation as part of the federal government that we sort of see as a sister organisation to ourselves. As technologies evolve and become more mature and more financeable, they play less and less a role, we start to play more a role, and then we both make ourselves redundant and it becomes commonplace for the Main Street banks to finance these technologies. Just one more slide on Rewiring the Nation, which is our, as I said before, we're the funding body for the federal government's rollout of the poles and wires and supporting infrastructure. As you see from the slide, it's more than just poles and wires to help enable all this infrastructure, all this new renewable infrastructure come to market. So the Australian federal government, through agencies like ourselves, are playing an important role and trying to encourage new industry and encourage the best forms or the best way of getting to 82% renewable by 2030 and net zero beyond that. So look forward to talking on this panel about more opportunities that Gippsland can play in that.
Here we go. So next up, he leads the supply chain for Corio, some may say, if you're wrong, for all of APAC. Our next speaker has had a diverse background, having worked as a lawyer in Australian mining, as well as international supply chain and logistics. Nick now sets his very wise eyes on how exactly are we going to build these projects. Please welcome to the mic, Nicholas Sterling.
I'm not sure whether I'm wise, but I certainly am with an illustrious group of speakers. It's quite funny, when I was walking in here, I kind of felt like I was in the Oscars or something in the back, and then I'm with all these great people today. So I myself am not illustrious, as many of you would probably know, particularly my co-workers, if they're in here. Giggles over there. But I do work for an illustrious company, and I work with an exceptional team. And the company is Corio. Sometimes people do call us Corio. Corio is another great place in the world. It's actually right adjacent to the Port of Geelong. And the Port of Geelong is, we have a great relationship with them. But we are Corio, and we're named after the Coriolis effect, which is a physical phenomenon that I'm not going to beyond embarrass myself in trying to describe, but what it really comes down to is the way how the wind works around the world. So, now I've got to do this, so as you can tell, I'm not very illustrious myself. So, I guess we got a bit of an introduction, but our shareholder is Macquarie Bank. So, the interesting story behind Corio is, or Corio, as sometimes we get called, is that we actually were founded by Macquarie Bank, but the story starts a lot earlier. In 2017, Macquarie acquired the UK government financing vehicle called the Green Investment Bank, and Macquarie creatively called it Green Investment Group. And what that meant is they had a broad portfolio of different projects. And what they did was very smart. They started looking at how they can break these into different projects by different technology and by different geography. And so we had EQ, which is our sister company, which is focused on batteries. Some of them are here today. We have our Australian onshore solar and onshore Australian onshore solar and onshore wind, which is some of them are here today, I believe, as well. We have Cerro, who are solar in Europe, and we have Blue Leaf, who are solar focused in Asia. And then we have Corio. And Corio was founded on the 1st of April 2022. And it's interesting because our CEO, who was here at GNEC last year, it was actually his birthday. And I said to him at the time once, I don't know whether having your birthday on the date that the company that you are now running is either a cool thing or is a little bit creepy. And he sort of laughed at me in his sort of charismatic sort of Scottish accent, and he gave me a good answer. And one thing about him is that he has his, if you ever meet the man, his energy and his drive and his experience, what he did, and that charisma, he actually sort of attracted a good quality C-suite underneath him, who then in turn attracted people from around the world. And so the current portfolio is 30 gigawatts. So it's a large developer of scale. We've got, I think, 5 different continents, projects in 5 continents. We've got about 10 plus offices around the world. And one of the thing is, it's a little bit like working for the United Nations, because there's people from different backgrounds and people with different stories, and they all come together with the purpose of, building offshore wind. So we're a specialist offshore wind developer. And one of our projects that I wanted to talk to you about today is the Great Eastern Project. So it's a 2.5 gigawatt project. It's a project of scale off Gippsland. We're one of 12 that have received our feasibility licenses. It's a fixed bottom site. We're now in the stage of we've done we're in the process of doing our marine baseline surveys. We're looking at other consenting and approval activities, initial engineering, all the fun stuff. Grid connection, we're doing a lot of work there, and with VicGrid, and we're also doing a lot of work with our local stakeholder team. And we've also got a team member whose job it is to build a local supply chain and attract an international supply chain to the region, and so that's me. So what I'm here to talk to you about today is how we can reinvigorate manufacturing for offshore wind in Australia and in Gippsland, how we can attract international OEMs but also attract a local industry to support offshore wind, and also what I want to talk about is a little bit of time on sort of upskilling the workforces and some of the work that we're doing in that space. And we'll also probably spend a little bit of, maybe a little bit at the end if we can, speaking about my favourite subject, ports. So we're bang on almost 3:10, so I think it's probably about time that I stop and go back to my illustrious co-speakers, and they can probably do a better job of talking about their experience than I can. But one thing I do want to quickly talk about is that when I think about the work that I'm doing, there is a bit of a sense of a purpose in there, and there can be thousands of potential jobs, local jobs, Australian and Gippsland jobs in the region in the construction phase. But there can also be, we've done a lot of economic modelling and a lot of sort of work to realise that operationally long-term future jobs in the region is a strong potential here. So that's about 340 jobs averaged over the life of the project for 30 years. And so when I think about what I love about the job is that that's part of that purpose is actually to help local communities connect with international supply chain, connect with international developers, and build a market.
Thank you, Nick. That's all our speakers, so we've got plenty of time for Q&A. Don't be shy on the app, we've got a few coming through already. So without further ado, let's get straight into them. And we'll go, well, this one's straight for you, Nick, since it's a Don't Leave Us Hanging. What did your boss say about his birthday being on the same date that Corio was born?
I think he actually, the type of guy he is, I think he was incredibly excited and thrilled. But I think what he also realised was that it's a big opportunity for offshore wind, and it's a big opportunity for and in turn it later became a big opportunity for Gippsland.
Very good. Now, this question gets asked a lot, but we are curious if it's changed, I guess. And David, you may be able to shed some light on this, but how is local content defined? It's a doozy.
So, in the legislation, local content is anything within the Australian and New Zealand region. So, to meet the Victorian Government's local content requirements, it is around what investment occurs within broader Australia and New Zealand. That's also one of the reasons why we have one of those specific requirements, or one of the things that we'll be looking at in individual applications, which will be looking how proponents will be developing jobs and industry in regional areas, and specifically, obviously, that's going to mean the Gippsland area for those offshore wind projects off the coast.
Very good. This one is for you, Joe. Any of the investments the CFC made with the objective of reducing the cost of energy to the taxpayer?
That's a great question, and yes, that's the underlying sort of theme of a lot of what we do, but specifically Rewiring the Nation. So the funding showed up on slide, nearly $20 billion. The idea is to provide funding to projects to allow, essentially absorb the cost at a low cost of finance for the project, so the cost passed through to energy consumers is lower, because you can quite well imagine the large cost of building out additional poles and wires across Australia to connect offshore and all new onshore regions for wind and solar is quite large, and if that all goes through to the energy consumer, that would be a large cost impost. So our funding is designed to offset some of that and be spread on the general taxation base, because that's how we're funded, as opposed to going to your individual energy bills.
Good accountant answer, Joe. How can we make sure that local Gippsland businesses have the opportunity to enter the supply chain? Who wants to take that one? Andy?
Yeah, look, for me, it's just about public awareness. I think, a lot of people don't realise how many opportunities are really out there. And I think if you sort of stick to traditional ways of seeking to communicate, you'll fail. Look, I do think you need local stories and real evidence of people doing things. I think one of the great things we've been able to do so far, when you do look at all the feasibility licence holders, outside of a few Australian-based companies, Corio obviously are essentially 100% Australian. Our involvement, it's not only Australian companies, but the international market has seen what can be done in Gippsland. A lot of that's been done on communication, but I think what we've sort of really got to do is bring it back to being local, have the great local stories. Look, I mentioned Andy McCarthy earlier. Look, a great story of someone who wasn't a local but became a local and created huge opportunities, so much so that you had a large national company, RACV, come and acquire the company and create more jobs. I think people just need to see that there are the opportunities. We spent a lot of time years ago at Yarram Secondary. We had a really close relationship with doing a lot of sort of mini careers fairs to let people know that there are opportunities coming. I think, look, I'm very patriotic, but we can be very lazy as a country. We can rely on a lot of, rather than talking to people, you put it on Twitter or social media and think you've done your job and you've communicated, but you haven't. We need to be a little bit old school in getting out and actually talking to people, but actually showing people through real leadership, and that's local people doing things, to really show that, yes, there'll be local jobs, but also supply chains which will invariably have, derivative jobs that'll come out that you can't even imagine. I was talking with Carlos from Blue Float earlier and others from Orsted, built an offshore wind farm off Tai Chong, and all of a sudden you see all these new hotels get built purely realistically to service that wind farm, but they had nothing to do with it. So I think once you actually start visibly seeing things and you actually speak to people, that's where a lot of the great opportunities will come locally.
Very good. And leading to that, and maybe this is for you, Nick, but Australian manufacturing is decreasing in Australia. Could offshore wind and renewables help reinvigorate it?
In a simple word, yes. I think it was 1990. I was looking up an RBA report the other day, and it was 15% of Australian GDP was from manufacturing, and now it's fallen to about 6%. Just building on what Andy was saying, I think one of the things that if we focus on that local level, and that's at the Gippsland level, but it can also be at Victoria and then Australia and New Zealand level, you really want to build investability. And you really want to build investability in Gippsland and in Australia. And the way to do that is to build a market. And how do you build a market? Well, you actually have to focus on the supply and the demand. And one of the things that with supply is we need more offshore wind zones across Australia. And then on the demand side, what we need to have is we need to have more focus on predictable, stable pricing agreements with the consumers, whether they be private or more likely public. And then what you find is that when you start developing that, you start getting certainty. And then another key element of demand comes in. The international OEMs, they start looking at Australia as a place to invest. Developers start looking at Australia as a place to invest, as a safe investment. And then in doing so, what they do is that they connect with local companies in the regions that they can partner with. And this is the type of work that we're trying to do at the moment. We're using gateways like ICN. We're using our own word of mouth, coming out, speaking to local companies, many of whom I've met in person at their facilities. And then what we do is that we also then use our own supply chain sort of consulting sort of work, and we put it all in a mix, and we sort of come up with a list of quite credible companies, and then we take that to the international supply chain to say, look, could you partner with these companies? Sometimes I feel like I'm a bit of a broker. I don't get paid, I'm no commission, unfortunately, but my job is to put local companies in contact with international firms. And they sometimes think Australia is a small little place when it comes to renewable energy. They go, okay, look, 2 gigawatts by 2032. 9 gigawatts by 2040. Hey, in the US, it's 30 gigawatts by 2030. UK is now 60 gigawatts by 2030. Australia is just too small, too far away. But then when you start showing them the story of what Australian manufacturing is and what it has been, and all the adjacent sectors, oil and gas, power generation here in the valley, onshore wind, the interest starts developing. So when we have that certainty, we can really turn that interest into market investment.
Great answer. This one's probably for you, David. Will the upcoming state government supply auctions impact how many projects are likely to come to fruition, and will we see some developers bow out at this point?
I missed the first part of that.
Oh, sorry. Will the upcoming state government supply auctions impact how many projects are likely to come to fruition?
So I guess the answer to that is the Victorian government's got their targets, they're legislated. It's 2, 4 and 9 gigawatts by 2040. That 9 gigawatts is clearly less than the 25 gigawatts that is there in potential. So I think that goes to the point of where the Victorian government currently is planning to go with its support. That doesn't necessarily mean that projects that were unsuccessful in either the first or going forward second, third auctions are not going to be viable. It's just at this stage there would not be kind of Victorian government support for it. I think the other thing just to mention on that is that offshore wind is a nascent industry here in Victoria, and like most nascent industries, we've still got quite a bit of work to do on those projects in terms of their feasibility. They should be getting management plans shortly. They'll understand better the seabed, the technical requirements and so on and so forth that's going to be required on projects. I mean, I think naturally you'd expect some attrition to projects to happen, as we see in most other industries, particularly those that are startup industries as well. So I think it's not just around Victorian government support, which will determine the extent to which projects are developed or not in the Gippsland area.
Okay. Someone, whoever chooses. Can you please explain the role of ports in facilitating offshore wind and what are the challenges we need to overcome?
I'll have a go, and then you can go. Or do you want to go first?
You go first.
All right.
Yeah,
very
happy
good.
to handball.
Thanks. Look, I have this snappy little buzz phrase, but no port, no project. So I think the thing is that when you look at, there's been a lot of news about Port of Hastings, and I think one thing that Corio, we've always thought about is a multi-port strategy. We have good conversations and good relationship with Port of Hastings, but as I alluded to before, we have good conversations with other ports such as Port of Geelong, Barry Beach, and other ports, Port Anthony. One of the things that the ports are an area that can also attract a lot of local investment through manufacturing precincts next to ports. I think the main thing is that as an industry, we have to look at how we can use these ports, but how we can also use manufacturing precincts and grow them adjacent to ports. And there will be probably a level of collaboration that is required between the developers in dealing with each of the ports. All of the ports want to be part of the story, so that's a good thing. I think what we need to do is, or what we are doing internally is working out our port strategy, and we're quite advanced on that. But a lot of it just starts with getting on the ground, getting away from your desktop analysis, speaking to people, speaking to the ports, speaking to the local suppliers, speaking to the international companies as well. And then that helps round out your strategy.
David?
So, I think we focus a lot on construction and assembly ports, and absolutely critical, right? You can't build offshore wind unless you have a construction and assembly port. Very specific requirements that sit around those construction and assembly ports. You've probably got to have a water depth of about 12 metres. Your laydown areas have to be maybe 15 tonnes, 25 tonnes for the quayside. You have to have significant laydown areas. That's really challenging in terms of getting access to those deep water ports, and clearly we have Port of Hastings, which we're still working through, which is intended to have that kind of 35 hectare laydown area, and we'll have that depth with it. But it's not the only port infrastructure that you need. You'll need, and then I've forgotten the exact name, but ports you need during constructions effectively to ship the workers to and from, to be able to support that. That's probably going to be required from about 28, 29 period as well. And also, as I said previously, the O&M ports, which will be critical. They're the ones that are going to support the industry through the lifetime that they're going, which is going to be 30, 40 years maybe. So I think that's why I really wanted to reference the capabilities that we already have down in Gippsland around those corner inlet ports, be that Barry Beach or Port Anthony, because it's critical that you're really close to the offshore wind zone to be able to actually manage that effectively. That's what makes it economic, that's what makes it efficient. And so I think we've just got to be aware that it's not just finding the ports for construction, it's finding the right ports for the life cycle of the industry going forward.
It's a bit of a jigsaw, and what you find is all the pieces will start moving in, and when you get a better picture on how to put those pieces together when you have a good strategy. But also when we do a lot of, we discuss this with David's team and the ports, and we have very good conversations and realistic conversations. And the Port of Hastings, there's been a little bit of negative press, but the team there is excellent, and what they're doing and what they're going to be looking to do and putting in, new permitting later on this year. So I think, best of luck to them.
Very good. So we have about 8 minutes or so before we get into a afternoon break. And this question is targeted at Andy in the app, but I think we can broaden it to get everyone to have a bit of a closing comment if we like. But I guess it's, the questions around, with the inception of the offshore wind 12 years ago, what can it look like in 12 years? And that's really what the whole session's about, is not just 12 years but beyond. And I guess the question I'd like to ask each of you is, with the right planning and investment, how big can we go that's feasible, and why?
Look, I'm the most unhindered by government or corporate overhang, so I was about to say whatever the fuck I like, but I can say whatever I like. Look, I would like it to be as large as possible. I know David will say, look, it's great that the Victorian government have legislated at 9 gigawatts, because I think it provides a realistic incentive to come to Australia without going overboard. You look at certain countries around the world, Scotland, they've got 19 areas lettered, yet realistically, you'd be lucky to get half of that built. And I think that's been the perception even within 6 months of that being let only 3 years ago. There's a lot of changes. Look, for me, I mean, the beauty of Gippsland, as I said, look, this is like in the DNA of what's been going for 100 years here. The mindset is here, it's a known destination for a lot of workers who not only live in Gippsland or the region, but outside of Victoria and Australia. You know, it's firmly on the map as being a place that knows what it's doing. And look, the great thing as well, by looking at a number of the internationals here, look, I run a semi-successful small conference in Sydney later this year, it's fantastic, but getting all the international players is a really hard thing to do. Yet we look at everyone who's got a licence, not only here today, but they've been here the last few years as well. People really love coming to Gippsland. Look, they love coming to Victoria and Australia, but they love and recognise these areas much more so than when we go to the Illawarra or the Hunter or to Bunbury. There are different stories there which aren't built on. Hunter's similar, 100 years of success, but it's a really disparate place, I think, from a mindset point of view, more so than Gippsland. So I think we should aim for however large we can go. Look, sadly, we live in a society where most people are generally negative, so there'll always be people putting limits on things, but I think one of the key challenges we've got, certainly those trying to build an industry, is to say, look, we can really reach for the sky to start with. All those natural guards and barriers and naysayers will be there. They have been the last 12 years, yet here we are today on the cusp of an industry which should be globally unbelievable and we should all be incredibly proud of.
Well said.
Sorry for swearing. Look, I might also get in. My film is showing tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. Planet Wind, if you want to come. There's some free merch as a further incentive if you want to come.
So we've plugged your conference and your film and your swan.
It's my electric company, electric truck company as well.
We're going to get kicked out soon, Andy. Who wants to go next? David?
Might as well just go
in
down the
order.
line. I think we talk a lot about the challenges that come with being first movers, and like there are challenges to overcome by being the first offshore wind zone in Australia and trying to get the first gigawatts in the ocean by 2032. But you overcome those challenges and there are benefits to be gained from being that first mover. The skills, the jobs, the investment that occurs in Victoria can then potentially be available to supply the rest of Australia if we get up and running first. And not just Australia, but broader in the APAC region as well. If New Zealand were to go forward, there would be opportunities there as well. So I think, as I said, I think that the 9 gigawatt in terms of Australia and in terms of the opportunities is the start. You get there and you build the base, and then there becomes the opportunities going forward, particularly when other states or federally we get targets and other people move forward as well. So I think that's something that's really important to remember.
Yeah, just building on both those statements, I think people don't vote in politicians who aspire to mediocrity. I think the 9 gigawatt target for Victoria is great. It's a bold, it's an ambitious target. Unless we have those targets, people aren't going to run as hard as they can towards those. And sort of how big can we go versus how big are we already sort of planning to go. I think sort of cast your eyes back, sort of if you were sitting on a stage like this maybe 10 years ago when they announced the RET target. We'll never build the RET. There's not enough cranes in the world. There's not enough ports in Australia. We'll never get there. It's crazy. Well, it got built, 5-6 years early. It's way overbuilt now compared to the target. Not saying we've overbuilt renewables. So yeah, I think with the right ambition and the right attitude, Australia can do this. We have done this in the past. We have a need to transition. I think a number of speakers at this conference have already said there is a finite time for how long we'll be running our coal-fired power stations. Every 2 years there's a plan, and the AMO announces, here's the dates that we think each of them will close. The writing's on the wall. We need to build this new generation, and why not? Why not build it here, where we have some of the best wind, some of the best sea conditions in Gippsland? Why wouldn't we try and build on that? Once we've got the start with the first 2 gigs, 4 gigs, 9 gigs, why wouldn't we build on that?
Nick?
So I agree with everything you said, team here. I don't agree with
the blue jacket team, I think we're
blue
called.
Jacket, yeah, thank you. So I don't agree. I can't agree with the FUCK comment, but everything else works. It's what I said back earlier about building, building your investability, building yourself a market. Not just thinking of, Victoria's been a trailblazer, but think of more gigawatts, more offshore wind zones that we can add. We are a nation of a relatively small population. I think we can fit into India and China, about 50 times in terms of population. But we do have a history of thinking big, and that's borrowed from probably my old employer, BHP. But when you think of the mining industry that I came from, the mining industry has, it's a very broad church of different metal groups and all the rest of it. But basically, this is the biggest employer, or one of the biggest employers in Australia. And the mining industry is sort of really, it's grown over about 150 years. So it's a massive industry of scale. And Australia is well known globally as a mining. Can we think about having that same way of thinking from 150 into sort of 10 to 15 years for offshore wind? Think big and build a big industry. And the good thing is you have people with mining backgrounds. Coal seam gas was very much a know-nothing industry, and then it turned into a huge industry in Queensland and off northwest shelf of Australia. That's extractive, I understand. It's extractive in fossil fuel, sort of extractive industries, but here we can do something with renewable energy as well. So we have to leverage those different sectors and do it, and onshore wind, when you're talking about the RET, and build that here. And we can do it, and we will do it with the right type of politicians who are elected, the right type of civil servants who are doing a good job building the policies, and the entrepreneurs and the trailblazers who come in here and take a massive risk and set it up. So I think we've got all the ingredients for success there.
Well said. And I think we're actually right on time. So we'll just close by thanking everyone. We'll continue to be optimistic and to aim big. We, as noted, we've been setting some very serious goals and targets, and the framework's starting to take shape. The recipe is starting to take shape in terms of what we can achieve, and it is a super exciting future, and we thank you all for being part of it. So thank you all.
Thank you from the back there. Thank you everybody for coming in from the sunshine. It was pretty nice out there, wasn't it? And we realise that we're sitting in between you and cocktails, so we promise we will be entertaining. This one will anyway. We've been having a good giggle out the back, don't you worry. We've decided to give away with the lectern. We're just going to sit down and have a yarn. We've got some awesome people here from different places, and we'll just introduce ourselves, I think. So, those of you who don't know me, Jess Reeves. I am official title as Director of Industry Cooperation at, I don't even know what institute I am, Institute of Innovation, Science and Sustainability at Federation University, based in Churchill. I'm a sustainability science researcher. I live in Melbourne North. I love Gippsland. And very happy to be part of this panel and interested in hearing interesting conversations. Over to you, Emma.
Am I on? Hello, darling hearts. I'm Emma. I'm a professor of National Centre for Reconciliation, Truth and Justice at our beloved Federation University. I'm also a Tripodi woman from Tebracorner country in Tasmania, and I'm here to share my love of offshore renewables.
Hi, I'm Kira Bott, and I'm from Better Transmission Gippsland, and I am the chairperson of that group, and we are a community group that consists of a large number of people that are primarily part of the study area that is transmission that's happening in Gippsland.
Hello, I'm Chris Buckingham. I'm the CEO of the Latrobe Valley Authority. I've lived in Gippsland since 1997 in many different places with my better half, Michaela Power, and I'm very pleased that, albeit I was the first member of my family who moved to Gippsland, I've been followed by a number of people, including my mum. So there you go. Good to see you too, Mum.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Boyer. I'm the outsider of the group. I'm from all the way north in Wollongong. So I'm from the University of Wollongong, where I work at the Australian National Centre for Ocean Resources and Security. Pretty new to the energy space, but have been very much pulled into it through the declaration of an offshore energy zone off our front doorstep.
Thank you, everybody. And of course, I would like to acknowledge, as many have before today, that we're meeting on Brakellan country, the Gunai-Kurnai people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. This is gorgeous country they've been looking after for an extraordinarily long time, and long may we continue in that vein, and we've got a lot to learn. Quite a number of the conversations have brought in this term today about social license. Social license, this is a term that gets kind of thrown out there. And we had a bit of a chat amongst ourselves about what on earth this term actually means, and we decided we didn't really know either. So when we had our bit of a pre-conversation about getting to know each other and why we were coming together to talk about this, Emma here came up with this idea, which I'm going to steal from her. This idea of, social license. What do we mean by license? Okay. So if you're on your L plates of social license, okay. The history of the term itself comes from, cleaning up some of the messes that we had before, whether it be from mining or some of the disasters that happened from that, and that license to operate, and was really a transactional process. Those conversations that you have to have, usually at rather than with community. Then we moved on a little bit, maybe to perhaps the P plate of social license. Like, oh, okay, I've got some control now. We're in the driver's seat. We can start making just some decisions. But what do we do with all this newfound power? It's a bit, a bit heady, a bit exciting. But I guess where we're looking to move to now, where the opportunity in the Gippsland region is in particular, is this idea of a full license. A really true transformational process that's co-developed with community, with operators, with traditional owners on country in place, which drives a new agenda with truly embedded relationships related to people and place. So how are we going to get there? I might just ask all of you, this term of social license, you can take it in turns. What's a more meaningful term to you in your context? And what is it that we really need to take the time to consider to earn our licence? Emma.
Yes. I really love the concept of cultural licence. And I love that because a few of us have just written a report on it, blue economy. And I believe that licence is a bit of a spectrum. Particular groups should have their own. Cultural licence for me, like social licence, it's just sort of this fuzzy concept. It's rather transactional, where business, giving out a few jobs and communities are happy with that, and it exists out there and it's a bit vague. I like cultural licence because it's quite defined boundaries. It's not that we don't care about everyone else, but, as black fellas, we've got our own needs. We've been screwed over by mining and forestry, and we see offshore renewables as carrying a moral and ethical heart. And for us, that means that, we belong. And so for me, cultural licence is about having a right traditional owner or legal native title right, or, you know, perhaps even a cultural commercial right. And it's also about developing out long-term relationships. So, you know, we might spend 6 years working out that relationship, but that's okay because, you know, all the stuff will actually happen very quickly after that. We want to have a sense of belonging. And more so, we want formal agreement, social license. You know, it's sort of like, oh, well, put it in the paper that communities like it. Doesn't really hold water for us. We want formal partnerships so that we've got an anchor on which we can provide a community benefit out of what I call Indigenous-led regional development that's good for everyone. We get a bit tired of, well, there's an anxiety there that I feel, that, you know, international interests, you know, our resources and the money goes offshore. And so I'd like to be able to put, you know, a bit of an option there and say, actually, I think us blackfellas can do a better deal than that for communities, quite frankly, white and black. And so a cultural licence is about formalising those relationships we have with each other and relationship with our sea country and relationship with those international developers. It gives a little bit more transparency. We're being held to account by everyone. I like that. I like that. Anyway, sorry. I'll stop there.
No worries. Thank you. So apparently a social licence means that the communities accept or approve of what you do. Supposedly, with a social licence, you're seen to have legitimacy. Your operations meet community expectations and that you're credible and you're trustworthy. But there's the problem. Trust is earned, and it's earned over time. It's not something that you can ask for up front. It's something that you have to earn over a long time and over a lot of hard work by doing the right thing again and again. And I don't think that social licence can really be separated from engagement, and that is a lot of what we're experiencing at the moment as a community, is a lot of engagement. And a lot of that engagement doesn't feel very meaningful. So I think that those two are significantly connected. And in order to get a social licence, it takes time, it takes trust-building exercises, and it takes engagement that is done well.
Yeah, thanks, Kira. I think trust for me is the theme at the guts of where I'd be coming from in terms of what social licence is. And I'm a pretty trusting person, so I give trust easily, but I'm also, once trust is lost, it's gone, and that's it. So for me, and like I'm just talking about my own personal feelings around trust itself and indeed social licence, and I think that if people are wanting to invest in this region, they have to earn trust, and then they've got to work really hard to keep it because it's really easily lost. And appreciate that there are many factors other than how a community might be feeling about a particular thing occurring in their region or next to the region at any one point in time. But, you know, and sometimes people, companies, governments do things in communities that they know will be unpopular. But I think for me, in terms of gaining even a modicum of acceptance, it's about actually building that trust and then helping community understand the importance of their acceptance and acknowledging that acceptance and empowering them to make really good decisions about what happens next. And there are probably a number of examples of really poor outcomes from a social licence perspective in this region. And Emirates starts, for me, with the way white people came into this region and colonised, took, dispossessed, killed, and damaged the oldest living culture and civilisation in the world, and treated with pretty much disregard for the first 180 years that we've been here. And I think we're starting to see some of the benefits of the work of GLOAC, who in a very humble but thoughtful and strategic way are now extracting meaningful benefits, not just for themselves, but the entire region. And they set a standard for us, not only in terms of behaviour and thoughtfulness, but also what is morally and ethically right to be doing, both onshore and offshore. I think for me, and I don't want to get us caught in holes, but I think for too long, and it's easy to typecast, but when I think about, one of the first places I lived in, Gippsland, which is Willow Grove, Blue Rock Lake, when we first arrived at Willow Grove, we thought it was just the most amazing thing. And then you'd sit on the bank of the lake on a hot summer's day, and somebody come and sit down next to you and have a chat, and they'd go, oh yeah, my farm's under that water. I'm never going to swim in that lake. I'm not going to accept it because that lake was put there on top of my family's farm and we weren't consulted. And that has been a recurring theme in this landscape over many, many years. And so for me, it's not only about the relationship with land, but it's also about the relationship with people and the environment itself. And then an understanding that it's gone like that if you don't do the right thing.
Yeah, Kira mentioned this word legitimacy, and I'm sorry to be a boring academic here, but unpacking that a little bit based on what the literature says, it's super interesting. So legitimacy lies at the heart of social licence, and we can think about it in three different ways. So a cognitive legitimacy is, does this activity make sense to me? Is it something that I'm familiar with? Is it something that kind of fits within my frame of reference? So this makes it really tricky when it's something new and something that we're not familiar with. Then there's pragmatic legitimacy, which is, put really simply and crudely, what's in it for me, or what's in it for me and my community. How are we going to be impacted by this, both positively and negatively? But the third element of legitimacy is the one I think we ignore the most and we pretend doesn't really exist, which is the moral legitimacy. And that's really about, does this fit with my values? Does this fit with who I am and who my community is in my relationships with this place, with my community? And we tend to kind of gloss over this and focus more on those two initial aspects of legitimacy. But I think it's social licence encompasses all those things, and of course it absolutely encompasses trust in a really strong way as well.
So it's quite tricky business we're talking about here. It's intricate, it's place-based, but it's also really basic and respectful as well. And something, you've all mentioned time in one aspect or another. It's something that takes time to gain and to earn and to nurture. It's not something that's a set and forget either. Chris, you've been around for a while. Surely there must be some good examples that you've seen of social licence.
Now, Jess, I feel like I'm slightly cheating here because I was set this question about a week ago and I've been thinking about it on and off for a week, and I rang Jess in a bit of a panic day before yesterday going, I cannot think of one good example of social licence being earned anywhere. I think your answer was, well, there were some good examples in Canada. And I'm going, I know nothing about Canada. But I sort of I've dug down, I guess probably in my own mind. Look, there is an example I think that's alive and well in Gippsland right now. And I've cited the work that the Gunai Kainai people have done through GLOAC in terms of, because it's a partnership, right? Daniel talked about that this morning. I think that is a living, breathing example that we should all be celebrating right now and leading in and supporting the traditional owners in every possible way that we can, no matter what perspective of where you're coming from, in order to see them thrive and prosper, because we know that when they thrive and prosper, we all thrive and prosper. But the second example that I would give, and actually I owe this to someone in my household who works pretty close to this movement, but I think land care, albeit not the energy transition, land care, and I am going somewhere here, Jess, but land care for me, I think established in the 80s with farmers, encouraging them to take better care of the country, did it in a trustful, respectful way. Farmers weren't made to feel bad for the work that they were doing on their existing property. They were shown. They weren't even taught. They were shown a better way. And then these beautiful layers of things that came through, and Ian Hill and Carolyn here today from the Tripodi River catchment group, land care group, it then became about the morning teas and the conversations and the connections that existed across landscape. And I think, so for me, that's a living, breathing example that we could all look at and go, not energy, but actually, when you talk about a significant transition, think about the way that farmland in Gippsland and indeed across the country has changed as a result of land care. That's a really good example. Where I'm going here, I guess, is also thinking about the bits that you can assemble that will help, if you like, social license be formed and created, but also, I'm going to use this word, and then you're going to go, what? I thought we got rid of this word in the 1990s, or at least ways in the 2010s, but just transition, right? And for me, I know just transition's been given a bit of a caning, but actually, when you think about the role of social licence in just transition, and then think about the absolute critical importance of supporting, whether you're a developer or government, but supporting organisations and community in their own organisation. So supporting the for-purpose sector, but also making a conscious decision, even though it can be uncomfortable at times, supporting an organisation like Kira's, because you know that a strong community organisation will actually mean that you have strong dialogue, strong conversation, and a stronger negotiation, and a better outcome for everybody in the end, even if at times it's uncomfortable and you feel like it would be easy just to push through. So for me, yeah, land care, standout example, and anybody's looking to support a group in the region right now, land care is a pretty good option for mine. Not biased, but I think also just that sense that by actually strengthening the people that we're working with rather than trying to detract from, dehumanise Kira, which is a conversation we had earlier just before we came out, absolutely critical that we all remain good humans in the process.
Thanks, Chris. It seems that tea and cake seem to be your motivating factors for a lot of things.
4:30, yeah, it's pretty close to cake time for me.
But it's interesting that you draw on land care, because as much as we associate land care as an environmental act and a Caring for Country Act, it was set up partly in the first place to care for people and connections in communities as well as land. That was part of the purpose. Michelle, we've brought you all the way here. We dragged you down from sunny Wollongong and splendid beaches. Let's have a little chat about the bad side of social licence. You must have seen some fairly appalling examples in your experience.
Well, I don't want to use the word bad, but we've certainly had some challenges in Illawarra. We've got I think we've got the title as the most controversial offshore wind zone in the country. We had 14,000 submissions, of which 65% were against. I don't think any other zone has come anywhere near that number of submissions. So we've had a pretty rough start to our offshore wind journey in the Illawarra. And I think part of the reason why it's hard to come up with good examples of social licence is because we tend to take it for granted, and it's something that we don't actually know we've got until we've lost it. So I think part of the challenges that we've seen so far in the Illawarra, and I think for most offshore wind zones outside Gippsland, has been a little bit of a function of the process of the legislative framework as it stands, which makes it a bit unclear who's giving the social licence and who's receiving it, I guess, because the government was running an offshore zoning exercise, which didn't really go into the details of what would go into those zones. So there was, when I talked before about those types of legitimacy, the cognitive legitimacy was missing. There was an information vacuum. This was a new proposal for an area that had levels of familiarity, not with offshore wind, but definitely with big business coming in and screwing communities over. So there was already a bit of resistance. In terms of that pragmatic legitimacy, it wasn't entirely clear what local community was going to get out of it. There was, again, that familiarity with big business coming in and the benefits not necessarily returning to the local community. So there's been lots of talks about international companies coming and benefiting, and that not coming back to communities. And I think complete underestimation of the moral legitimacy as well. People love the ocean. People are very attached to the ocean. So there was a lot of dismissal of people's concerns about views, for example, but this is part of people's identity, and it's part of what gives them solace and comfort in the region. So there was a bit of I guess, a failure across all three levels of legitimacy, and I think that kind of really came out really quite strongly in the way local community has responded and continues to respond to offshore wind.
And how do things stand now?
Look, I think things have calmed a little bit, but we'll have our feasibility licence application process announced sometime in the next few months, I suspect, and I think we'll see an uptick again of community response. But I think what we've been talking about here is, I think there's now an opportunity, once we know the proponent, we can start to work with, hopefully the community can start to work with that proponent to build the relationships, to have the conversations, and sit down and have really, hopefully, very meaningful conversations around how their concerns can be addressed.
And Kira, as a community member in the thick of it, I'm giving you your magic wand here. What does good social licence look like on the ground?
So I was just a little bit concerned with what Chris said earlier, because I don't want you all to think that if you rock up with tea and cake that you're going to get a social licence to do whatever the heck you want. That's not how it works. It's far, far deeper than that. I think it is challenging to get, and I think with social licence, it's hard to pull apart because it's actually an aspirational term, something that you're all working towards getting, because it's not something that you can get before you actually start doing your work and start doing the right thing by us again and again, like I said earlier. I think the best place to start with social licence is through good engagement. And the thing that concerns me the most at the moment, having been the subject of government projects on 2 separate occasions now, and this engagement thing, it's a process now. It's a process where you have to have so many of this and so many of that, and you interview this many people and you talk to that many people and you churn out document after document after document with things that people have said and things that communities have said. But what I'm yet to see is what's being done with that information. How is that actually helping us move forward? And I tell you what, it's hard. It's hard as a community member to be put through that workload, through that mental stress for so long. I've been a part of this the issue around transmission, which is so scary because it's the thing that everyone hates because it's so problematic. And sorry to bring it up right before happy hour, but if we don't talk about that big white elephant in the room, we can't deal with the big white elephant in the room. And everyone would have to agree that that's where the biggest issues lie, is how do we get this amazing energy that we've got about to happen to the grid? It needs a highway, and unfortunately, my community are going to cop the brunt of that highway. I think a good stepping stone to start with getting a social licence is if you can work with the stakeholders that have the most concern about the activity. And on nearly every occasion, that is the community that is directly impacted by what you are wanting to do. And we need a voice at that table. So you can crunch your numbers, you can have every engineer on the planet working those numbers, but if you can't bring the community with you in that journey, then you've got a big problem. We were talking backstage, everyone's very aware of what's happening over West and how the community are classed as feral and really difficult and problematic. And I actually have so much sympathy for those people because I know exactly why they're behaving in that way. They have no other option. They have been given no other option. Over here, we are incredibly lucky. You have a community that are ready to embrace you, but we want a voice at that table and we want you to do the right thing by our community. When you push people into a corner and you give them no other option, that is when you get aggression, that is when you get protests, and that is when you get all your problems. So working with the people that stand to be impacted the most is so important, and it is the most crucial step if you and your company would like to obtain that aspiration of a social licence. Thanks.
Thank you. That was really powerful. Thank you. And it's something that I reflect on in my practice. I go out and I have workshops and I consult with people, but being really mindful of community's time, and as you say, where does that information go? You're giving your ideas, your intellectual property, your passion, your interest, and your care for this place, but what happens to it? How is that being used, and how is that? So I think we all need to be really mindful and respectful of when we're meaningfully engaging with community, what is the feedback that we're giving as well? It's not just take, it's what's the give back with that. Emmy, you come from a unique perspective on this stage, from an Indigenous rights-based perspective. But how do you think that can improve the whole conversation, not just for First Nations people, but all parties as well?
Yep. I love rights. I hate that term stakeholder. Oh, we'll go out and consult with stakeholders. You know, white fellow, black fellow, we're all rights holders, aren't we? You know, we live in our communities. We want to be treated with respect and dignity. I think that, I think that allows us to become rights holders. Not remote. I mean, for me, that moral and ethical heart, is absolutely about elevating who we are as communities into this regional development. It takes a transactional and creates a transformational. So for us more, we've got one of the best guidebooks you'll ever come across, and it's the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Australia adopted this in 2009. And one of the, so many of us in our communities, we work with this concept called free, prior and informed consent. Kind of gets used against us, we don't want to give the black fellas free, prior and informed consent because then they might veto something. They'll turn around and say no. It's a real shame because, we're not given the opportunity to say, yes, please, and more of it. And so for me, free, prior and informed consent is, absolutely get to know it from an Indigenous perspective because this will help you too. Free means no harassment. You're not being poked into a corner and being told to do this. We don't have, security forces at our community door saying, I think you should do this, right? Free. We're allowed to have our safe spaces where we can make healthy decisions. Love that. That's going to apply to everyone. Prior. Oh, gosh, don't send me your circular letter and say, could you please respond to this in a month, and read 600 pages of a document, right? Doesn't work for any of us. Prior. We've really got to work with those rhythms and seasons of a community. We need to be able to know this well in advance so that we can contemplate what that might mean for us and how then we can thread that through for community benefit sharing. Love that one, prior. Give us as much time because, as mob, it'll take years for this. We love that because it becomes relational, not extractive. Got to have that relationship. So we've got free, prior, informed. Oh, I love this one. There is no better way to get informed than to actually lead that work. I don't want as a stranger coming in to our communities, holding a little workshop and having a few maps and saying, tell us about your cultural heritage. Oh, God. Don't want that. Best way to get informed is to be able to lead this so that we're learning together. We transform anxiety into uncertainty. And uncertainty is quite different. Anxiety, you know, it's all on you. Oh God, what am I going to do? I don't know. You know, narrow choices. But from a cultural perspective, uncertainty allows us to fall into our communities. Oh, auntie, oh, sister, I'm not really sure. Which way should I go? I'm a little bit uncertain about this. Because baked into our culture, you know, 40,000 years, a little bit uncertain about stuff. But that uncertainty is a strength where we get to sit there and yarn together. We get to sit there and say, is that a good pathway to go down? What's that law telling us? And so, free, prior and informed consent, if we can support that for us mobs, broader communities are going to benefit from that. You're going to say, well, you know, how come we can't have what those black fellas have got here? They're doing all right. They've been able to decide this. And I think it's a real strength that we go to that guidebook of the Declaration of the Rights. And we say, you know what, I've got a right here. I've got a right to be treated with respect and dignity, and I've got a right to fall into our communities, to ask their leadership, are we doing the right thing? And I've got a right to lead that work. I don't think that's asking too much, quite frankly. I think it's actually quite a good, it's a fair exchange, isn't it? You want to come in here? Let's do it. Because then you're going to trust us to have that right of approval. It's at the moment social licence is taken away from us as that transactional, I might say no, so let's squish it. Squish their rights. But we're adults here in the room. And so taking our lead, treating each other with respect and dignity and finding your place in country, I think that's good for all of us.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you all for your very generous responses to these questions. I've just picked up my phone, and I can see that some of you have been picking up your phone too, because there's more questions that have come through here. So, you're on the spot now. Let's have a look here. All right, I think this is a good one here. And anyone can jump in, you know, be nice. Oh, hang on, it's just moved. When is it considered that social licence has been obtained? You know, when do you tick that box? Often the opponents are very vocal, even if not in great number. So,
I don't know that you can ever say that. I think, and that's probably one of the main problems with the term social licence, because it sounds like it's a one-off. But social licence is something that has to be continuously worked at. And I do think it is very problematic to use numbers to determine whether you've got it or you haven't. There's lots of problems with that. I think that there needs to be genuine and good engagement across a broad section of the community, because certainly what we've seen in the Illawarra is that really vocal and highly polarised debates tends to actually silence voices as well. So what happens when it becomes very fraught and very ugly? People go and I mean, I certainly did. It's just not a nice place to engage. So then, in fact, other people's voices are being silenced in that process as well. So I think there has to be a recognition that this is an ongoing process of building relationships and having conversations across a broad section of the community, and that has to be ongoing. And I don't know that there's ever a point where you can say, tick, we've done it.
Anyone else want to have a crack?
I'll try and keep this quick to the point. So social license for me is just another way of describing a relationship, right? So like when you get married, you don't go, oh, I'm married now, I'm not going to talk to the missus for the next 20 years because I've got my license certificate, right? It's the same sort of deal. Or if you're in business and you're selling a product to a customer, you don't go, oh, I've made the biggest sale of the year, I'm just going to walk away because I don't need to sell them anymore, right? So to your point, it's another way of describing a relationship. I think for me, there's so many traps on the engagement consultation side of things. The critical thing is to go in with good intent and be really open and honest about what you're hoping to achieve through that. Notwithstanding, Emma, your points around understanding rhythms and appreciating the way that decisions are made. But I think if you're going in with good intent and with a degree of humility, you've got half a chance. But if you're going in to tell people how things are going to be from day one, you're in trouble. The other point that I'd make, and I hear this used a lot, and I don't know that Gippslanders are sick of providing their opinions about things just yet. And Jess, you're doing a really fundamental piece of work with CRC time around, rehabilitation or repurposing of mine land, not the void, the land. And I've not come across one person in that entire process go, Jess, I'm so sick of answering your questions. I have an opinion, but I'm not sharing it with you because you know what? I don't think you're listening. And as an example, LVA, who take great pride in themselves as being place-based and an organisation that works really hard to elevate voices that would not otherwise be heard. We recently ran a survey called Gippsland Views. So if you're on Facebook and you live in Gippsland, you've probably copped an ad in the last couple of weeks saying, we'd like your opinion on Gippsland 35 and other things. And when we went in, we got a reputable agency to do this. And when we went in, we thought, we're using Facebook to run a survey across the region. Chances are we're going to get pounded, or people are just not going to complete. Well, I think the target was 1,500 responses in 4 weeks, and we had 1,700 responses in a week and a half from right across Gippsland. Now, I'm not saying that a Facebook survey, albeit it was a really well-designed survey, professionally run, I'm not saying that's going to give us all of the answers that we need as a region for the future, but we should be accepting of evidence and information coming from many different sources in order to be able to actually inform our own view about which way the world is up, because otherwise we can find ourselves talking to our own little groups of people and creating bubbles of opinion and thought that then don't actually allow transfer of ideas and exchange of thinking and new strategy.
And I have completed my survey, I'll have you know. I might direct this one to this end of the stage, and there's a couple of related questions here, talking to the diversity of communities. So there's one that's communities are made up of a range of people with diverse views, and there will never be complete agreement. So at what point can you say that there is broad community acceptance? Or how do you deal with the diversity of opinions? Have a crack at that, Kira?
Look, you're right, there is a diverse group of opinions, but I think that you need to listen really carefully to the ones that you propose to impact the most. So in my experience, that's those on your transmission line or your study area of where you want it to be proposed. I think that their voice should be a really significant one because after all, you do need to go onto their properties and access their properties to do what you want to do. I think there's some value in looking at the community's thoughts. If they don't like what you plan to do, then it's probably really unlikely that they're going to like you or give you a social licence once you actually start your project. So it's probably a bit of a step-by-step thing, but making sure that you're listening to those that are actually impacted. One thing that really annoys me quite a bit is when surveys are done, and surveys are completed by people like us who are a humble small community of landholders on farms, so our numbers aren't great, but when those surveys go out to people in Melbourne and wider Gippsland and all over the state, well, our voice gets really, really small, and yet we're the ones that have to wear this enormous cost of what's about to happen. So I think that making sure those power imbalances in those opinions isn't what's listened to, I suppose.
Thank you. Emma, did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, that was lovely, because I totally agree with that, that the communities who are at the centre of renewables should be at the top of the pyramid. Absolutely. You know, I don't want other mobs coming in and telling me what to do in my own country, and I'm certainly not here to tell mobs in Gippsland and Kurnai country what to do. And so we don't seem to have a scale on how we respect those who are at the forefront of developing up renewables, and put it against this sort of, you know, out there fuzziness of, you know, anyone can have a say. And that's fine. But, you know, like you say, when it comes down to the count back, all votes are equal. You know, black fella, we don't live in a democracy. We get told by our elders what to do. You just do it. So, you know, for me, that count back really needs some qualifiers on it. And this is the thing, you know, international, oh, well, you know, we've got stockholders everywhere that we're responsible to. Well, that's great. That's your business. You know, it's not ours. And so I don't mind boundaries being put around this. I love the global debate about it. But, you know, as blackfellas, we're place-based, you know. We've got a lot of common interests, a whole heap of common interests here. And that's what excites me, you know, healing relationships through telling outsiders to go away.
In a nutshell.
Jess, can I just riff off Chris's marriage analogy, which I really enjoyed, and my brain's been going around. I heard this really interesting stat that 60% of disputes or disagreements within a marriage will never be resolved. And so what actually defines a successful marriage is how a couple navigates that conflict and finds a way to still work together despite the fact that they can't agree on some, and they're usually very core, you know, related to your core values. And I think another thing about a good marriage, and I feel like I'm authority on this because I love my husband dearly and I feel like we've got a good marriage, is equal power. Like, so we're a partnership. And so if we wanted to take this analogy of a marriage further, I think that's a couple of really important points. It's an equal relationship. It's not somebody dictating, so there has to be a sense of partnership, and there has to be a way to navigate the disagreements. We're never going to have full agreement on this. We are never, ever going to have 100% of people happy. So how do we actually embrace conflict, work within conflict, and do conflict well? I think that's where our challenge lies.
The comfort of discomfort. Yep. There's a couple of other crackers of questions here that I would really like to try and touch on before we finish up. And this is a pertinent one. Particularly in the modern day and age, what do you think the impact of, it says mainstream media, but I will add social media as well, is having on the issue of social licence for renewable energy projects?
Can I answer that one? I don't think it has any impact at all. When you're the one standing there wearing the impact of these projects, I'm not looking at social media. I'm looking at what is going to be different in my life and how it's going to impact my life. I'm not going to social media to get information or anything like that. So engaging at a human level with real people that are really involved is really important. And then I think social media is completely irrelevant.
Thank you.
Sorry, I do feel like I need to say something on this. I don't want to hog the limelight, but this was such a big topic in the Illawarra with the offshore wind, this idea of misinformation being circulated, and there absolutely was false information being circulated. But I think it's really dangerous for us to blame that as the issue. I think the the levels of opposition we saw in the Illawarra, it was the misinformation and the way it was taken up and circulated, to me, was a symptom rather than the cause of what was happening in our community, because people were responding to the messages that aligned to their emotional reactions to this big change that's happening, and no one would have looked at it or circulated or have any interest in it if there had been a level of comfort with the way the process was rolling out, and if there had been probably a broader understanding of what was coming. So I think it's really, it's a risk to just say it's misinformation, it's disinformation, and that's what's causing opposition, I think, because then that actually does drown out the voices, and it actually makes things more polarised because people think they're being told they're stupid, and that's not helpful.
Jess, I reckon mainstream media and social media are incredibly influential on the way that we think as a society. And I think that as human beings in a Western democracy, we're probably getting better at discerning the big P political agendas that run through. But I think it's still a real challenge for us as a community, particularly when people are really sophisticated at tapping into insecurities or injustice or indeed fears around what may happen next. And I think that it's so important that we do our very best in a respectful way to hold truth at the centre of what we're doing. To the original point that we sort of raised around the foundation of social licence is trust and respect. And so for me, I think, you know, as somebody who's seen and been very aware of behaviour of a number of people who should know better, we have to, in the best possible way, hold people to account for their behaviour and keep things as positive and constructive as we can be, both in human life and indeed in that virtual world where it seems that the keyboard provides some sort of prophylactic protection against accountability for, you know, your opinions. So I just say, you know, discern truth as best you can in the knowledge that there is so much misinformation out there that's being peddled by people who have really fixed agendas that have got absolutely nothing to do with the well-being of our community.
Yeah. I've got another juicy one for you. So, and all of you, and we mentioned this before, all of you have spoken about time and the development of these relationships and ongoing over time. But as we heard from, you know, the early presentations today, we don't have time. These things are going to roll out quickly. We're going to need to transition really, really quickly. So the actual question is, what is required to persuade decision makers, aka the big bosses, and shareholders that time is necessary to build trust and enable broad participation and good decision making? And I'll just add to this, rather than just having a Vegas wedding and getting on with the job. How do we do it? How do we explain that this will take time?
Anyone else? It's the golden question, isn't it? How do you make time when you don't have time? I think that engagement comes into this. And one thing that really amazes me is that we are pouring more and more money into engagement than we have ever done. So there are, you know, specific companies that have been developed for engagement, to do engagement well. And yet we're still not seeing the desired result. And I think that's where the time comes into it. Now, I know you couldn't think of a good analogy before when we talked about social licence, but in my community that really is at the forefront of all of this, we do have a company of Star of the South. And I think they've probably been one of the closest in taking the right steps to getting that aspiration of a social licence. They've been at it for 7 years at least. So how do we squash 7 years of work and community conversations and engagement into a short time? I suppose it comes down to, do we want the job done quick or do we want it done well? And I know I've got 3 little kids at home, and for their sake, I want this job done well.
You hear? Anyone else want to add?
Just to add to that, I think once it's been done well, it creates momentum, and so hopefully then that smooths the transition for the next thing to hopefully also be done well. But if it's done poorly up front, then that slows everything down. So I think it's like anything, you've got to invest time to save time, I guess, in the same way you invest money to save money.
And also, I think we need to start thinking outside the box when it comes to talking to communities. We know that ticking boxes and running open days and pop-ups and community session after community session just doesn't work. So we need to stretch our thinking and start pushing against those walls of that rigid structure of process that engagement is supposed to be, and start going back to our roots. What is engagement? Engagement is genuinely talking to people and genuinely listening to people and solving problems together.
Have I got time for one more? All right, last one, I promise. Can you rebuild social licence once it's been damaged?
Yes is the short answer, but it's understanding that it's going to be harder the second time around. It just takes so much more work, because trust is trust, right? Once trust is broken, then, oh my God, I'm going back to the marriage metaphor. If you do the wrong thing in a marriage, like, it's possible to rebuild the marriage, but it's going to take a lot of hard work, and nobody's ever going to forget in that relationship what happened. I'm shutting up right now.
Microphone off that man.
Oh gosh, we probably had, 200 plus years of social licence being broken. But every day I hold out hope. I absolutely do, but I think for me that it's a different kind of leadership where it's more humble, as opposed to I know, and the company knows, and the stockholders know. I think it's about, again, owning up to what we don't know and what we can learn together. And coming back to our metaphor about, from L plate to P plate, it's okay for communities to be riding shotgun here. Maybe we take turns in driving it. And so I just think that it can always be gained, but if we're going to keep the same approach, well, God, wasted effort there. I think it's got to be a fair exchange, respect and dignity for us as people, in our communities, on our country, doing this. It's okay that we take the wheel. It's okay.
And on that note, can I thank you all for your engagement with this session and these questions, and you for all your gorgeous answers. Thank you.
Thank you.